president of the Bitcoin Policy Institute, and it is a true honor to have all of you here. On January 3rd, 2009, Satoshi released Bitcoin. The world was forever changed, but almost no one realized it. A handful of pioneers took up the task of explaining Bitcoin, how it worked, and why it would make the world a better, freer, and fairer place. These advocates were largely met with derision, but they continued their work undeterred. Fast forward to today, 16 years later, tens of millions of users participate in Bitcoin's network, and it is the 9th largest asset in the world. Its supporters, once relegated to email lists and internet forums, are now on Main Street, Wall Street, and as of Thursday, the Oval Office. When the history of this decade is written, last Thursday's executive order will mark a turning point. The president established a strategic Bitcoin reserve and announced a policy to maximize Bitcoin's strategic position as a unique store of value in the global financial system. This would have been impossible without countless individuals, many of you in this room, taking the time to discuss, understand, and ultimately champion Bitcoin. Our goal for today is to continue this process, to help people understand how Bitcoin benefits America and the world writ large. To that end, we've gathered Bitcoin developers, investors, advocates, and industry executives alongside government officials, policy experts, and civil servants here in our nation's capital to build on Thursday's momentum and chart a course for an America strengthened by Bitcoin. Thank you all for being here, and I'm very, very excited for our next speaker, the original Bitcoin senator, Senator Cynthia Lummis.
Good morning, everyone. I should have walked around here sooner. I didn't realize how many people were here. This is a fabulous turnout. And I'm so excited to be here because I get to do something I never get to do, is being an honorary co-host, which means other people do all the work and I just get to come and enjoy. And enjoy is right, because this room really is filled with the leaders in this business, in this industry. People who got it before other people could see what was about to come. And now your vision from these past years is coming into full fruit and flower here in the United States. And it was truly a coincidence that President Trump's executive order and the announcements of last week at the White House coincided with today's pre-planned event. So congrats to the Bitcoin Policy Institute and to all of you for your prescient work in putting this together. We have votes today at like 11:30, and my staff says, "Oh, you can make your remarks and then come back to vote." And I said, "Heck no! I want to stay all morning because I get to sit and listen to you, the experts in this industry." So I'm here this morning to greet you and hopefully just cheer you on and inspire you for what you're doing, because the innovations and the vision and the excitement and the knowledge base is in this room. And there's so much to share with other people that we have a lot of work ahead of us. But the real contributors, the real sharp minds, the leaders, the innovators are here so we can work together to make this happen. I'm so pleased to announce that today I will be reintroducing the Bitcoin Act. And I'll be joined here shortly by Senator Justice of West Virginia, who is one of the co-sponsors. And we have several other additional co-sponsors. And a lot of it is a result of the excitement that's been building, both among you and at the White House. And so we intend to make a real push for helping people understand this asset class. You know, there are still people who don't know the difference between Bitcoin and other digital assets. I was listening, I was homesick with pneumonia last week, and so I could barely lift my head off the pillow. But I was listening to Fox Business, and one of their on-screen talents, a gal that has some pretty good knowledge about digital assets, was talking about the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve. And one of her co-hosts said, "What is a Bitcoin?" And so I'm waiting to hear what she had to say. And she gave an absolutely perfect definition of the Ethereum blockchain. So there's still a lot of confusion out there about why Bitcoin is so unique, why it is digital gold, why it is a strategic asset, why it is freedom money, why it brings other countries into a system that allows individual freedom as well as freedom from governments that have hyperinflation or corruption. I mean, this asset is a game changer for the whole world. So for America, the leader in financial innovation, to have sat on the sidelines for as long as we have is unusual for us. And that's why I'm so proud of President Trump and his team for taking us off the sidelines and putting us in the arena of global policymaking and making sure the innovations that happen here. And he has pledged that he wants America to be the place that is the repository of the knowledge base, the mining, the entire gamut of financial services associated with Bitcoin. And he realizes that a strategic asset that has the durability, the quality, the completely 100% decentralized nature of a scarce asset like Bitcoin is absolutely unique in the world in the 21st century. And the talent to harness those capabilities, those qualities of Bitcoin, and make them available throughout the world, and here in the United States as well, to people who are either unbanked or underbanked, and in the scary case of Choke Point 2.0, debanked. Debanked Americans. I mean, who could have ever thought that could happen in this country? That banks would take customers off their balance sheets because they're afraid of the business you're innovating? That's about the un un-American thing I can imagine. Hopefully those days are over, and we're doing everything we can to make sure they are. That's un-American. We're not going back. We're going to make sure this asset and other assets in digital format become the product that the world looks to. This becomes the product that helps America remain the world's reserve currency and that brings about innovations that make money faster and cheaper and better available, regardless of where you live in the world, regardless of your circumstance. This really is freedom money, and America should lead when it comes to freedom money. So I'm just looking forward to being here today and being the little fly in the wall that gets to listen to all the expertise in this room. I want to thank you so much for what you're doing for this industry in America, and for sharing your knowledge base with those of us in Congress who don't have your vision, don't have your knowledge, but want to harness it and make it available so you have a clear legislative framework that gives you the ability to innovate and be free and make this asset everything that it can be, everything that it was designed to be. So God bless you all, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say. And now, I think I get to introduce Senator Jim Justice, don't I? So what's really fun for me is I didn't know that Senator Justice was a Bitcoin guy. And we've had the opportunity to sort of get to know each other over this mutual interest. Obviously, he is a extremely knowledgeable businessman in many aspects of the United States economy. He's an innovator. And it's just so much fun to work with innovators because they're happy people. And I am delighted to be joined today with my dear friend and colleague, Senator Jim Justice of the great state of West Virginia.
Well, this is my notes. So let me just say just this. I can't be more honored to be here for sure. But just to think, the Crypto Summit, Bitcoin Act, it's really unbelievable what we have right at our fingertips. That's all there is to it. Now, I got a lot of gray hair, and really and truly, Senator Lummis is a superstar beyond belief. We have our president behind the movement right now. We have this great senator behind this movement right now. Now's our time. Now's our time to really do something. Now, with that being said, I think just about just this. The whole world awaits. I always call the voters Toby and Edith. Now, I'm a plain-spoken guy, okay? There's nothing fancy about me, but I've done a lot of stuff. Now, and with all that being said, I'm a real believer, and I'm really, really proud to join the team today. But some way, somehow, we've got to reach Toby and Edith. We've got to educate. We've got to do so much because right at our fingertips, there's so much opportunity, it's off the chart. You know, I think about, you know, and I know you've heard this 10 million times, but really, if you just explained and said, you know, there was a time we went from a horse to an automobile. We went from an automobile to a flying machine. Then all of a sudden, we ended up on the moon, and now we're going to Mars. But in the financial world, we got to do the same thing. We have to do the same thing. And right now, we all know is our time, our opportunity. Like I said many, many times, I'm a business guy. I'm a real believer. I want to be on the team. I absolutely think I can bring a lot to the table. But with all that being said, I've got to say just this. We have so much of an opportunity right now, right at our fingertips. Of all things, I would say to each and every one of you, just this today, and just keep this in your mind. I'm a coach. I've coached forever. I still coach. I love kids. But you know what my ball team would do right now? My ball team would all be together and they would scream, "Let's go!" right now. That's what all of us should do. Let's go. because now is our time. Right now is our time. The opportunity to do stuff to perpetuate this nation beyond belief. It may very well be that we become the center of the universe as far as the financial world. That's what we want to do. American needs to lead the way. So it's really, 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 it touches my heart in a big way. My dad would have always said, dream big, son. Dream really big. We came from really humble beginnings. But my dad would have said, dream big. And my ball team would say, let's go. God bless you. Thank you so much. No, I'll stay right here. Where do you want me to stay?
Right there.
Can I sit in this chair?
Absolutely.
Now we're talking.
Yes. So it is my privilege to introduce the next speaker, Michael Saylor. Now, Michael Saylor, as we all know, is truly an original visionary. He could see what was coming before so many of us, and he made this a pivotal investment strategy that has just turned to digital gold left and right. He has articulated the qualities of Bitcoin in particular in every remark he gives, and he helps people understand what it really means to be fully decentralized, fully scarce, fully durable, and all of the other assets that make Bitcoin digital gold. He's just one of the true leaders in Bitcoin policy. He has helped me understand this asset and provided me with tools and mechanisms to help educate my fellow senators. And we'll be using those, Michael, as the days and months come forward here, and Senator Justice and I have the opportunity to share the knowledge that you have shared with us. Please welcome Michael Saylor.
I'm delighted to have the opportunity to speak today. The word strategic Bitcoin reserve to the casual observer they sound like a stockpile of an asset. To a closer observer, it sounds like a stockpile of the most valuable asset the human race has ever invented. But I'm here today to show you how the strategic Bitcoin reserve represents a strategy for United States digital supremacy in the 21st century. The president, with his vision, has established a strategic Bitcoin reserve as of last week and has declared that America will be the Bitcoin superpower. That is prescient. I would hazard to guess that the great majority of the people that saw that post don't even know what Bitcoin superpower means, and they haven't really considered it. I was inspired by the words, and that caused me to put together this presentation today. Why is Bitcoin critical to the prosperity of the United States in the 21st century? That is the question we all should be asking. There are many metaphors for thinking about a strategic reserve of Bitcoin. Bitcoin is digital capital. If we thought of it as Bitcoin as digital capital, is this a stockpile of cheese? Is this a stockpile of oil, natural gas, or even uranium, all of which would be interesting? Well, at its worst case, in its narrowest form, you could think about the strategic Bitcoin reserve as a stockpile of the apex asset of the human race. And so what's it worth? Well, over the next 20 years, I think it's worth anywhere from $3 trillion to $106 trillion to the United States. U.S. corporations, like my corporation, are actually recapitalizing on Bitcoin. We've gone from having $250 million of assets 48 months ago to having nearly $45 billion of assets in 48 months. If you look out over the next 20 years, corporations that are accumulating Bitcoin on their reserve, like MSTR, like Mara, like Riot, they're going to have 20 to 40 trillion dollars. So this is a small metaphor, but it's a powerful metaphor. But, you know, it's hard to rent out or finance or develop your cheese or your gold or your natural gas buried in a vault. So a more powerful metaphor is Bitcoin is digital property. If you own 5% of Manhattan and your family had owned it for 100 years and someone said, how are you going to pay your bills? You wouldn't say, we're just going to sell it. You would say, we're going to rent it. We're going to develop it. We're going to put a building on top of it, a business on top of it, or we're going to finance it. We're going to borrow against it. The same is true with Bitcoin. In 20 years, the United States could be generating $10 trillion per year by renting, developing, or financing the assets in that strategic Bitcoin reserve. The AIs are coming. The AIs don't get bank accounts. They don't get credit cards. The AIs, the artificial intelligence economy, will be built on digital capital, digital property. It'll be a $100 trillion economy. It'll be built on Bitcoin. Well, a lot of people, they think of it as an asset. You think of it as a property, but what we know to be true is that Bitcoin is actually a network, and it's not just any network. It's not an information network. It's an energy network. It's a conservative network. I can send $1 billion from me to you. I lose it. You have it. That is the conservation of energy in cyberspace. So when you start to visualize Bitcoin as a digital energy network, what you realize is that trillions of dollars of digital commerce will flow over that network. The banking system of the world is going to rebuild itself on a digital energy network. We're going to have 40,000 banks that will be settling with each other in real time. Finally, moving billions, tens of billions, or hundreds of billions of dollars an hour over a pure digital network. Right? So if you look at the world and imagine digital energy moving around the world, and then you ask the question, would you want to own it? Or would you want to ignore it? It's an important question. And of course, you know, I think some of you might have seen the cyber blackout of X yesterday and all the cyber attacks. The last and most important metaphor is when we have open digital energy flowing, it is a commerce network. But when we reverse that digital energy into a shield, it becomes a defense system. Bitcoin's a digital defense system. Bitcoin messages, data authentications, transactions, they're unstoppable, uncorruptible, immutable, immune to tampering by any known cyber threat. You can protect the United States commercial and military and financial systems behind a wall of digital energy. And that's exactly how we will do it. You know, even Elon Musk pointed out, the AIs don't know how to hack Bitcoin. They can spoof you out of your money. They can convince you that there's someone they're not. There's no way to trick an 800 exahash digital wall that's based on modern encryption. The AIs won't get through that wall. What's driving the growth of Bitcoin? It is the most powerful force in the world right now. It's growing nearly 60%. It's become the 8th largest asset in the world. It's about to become the largest asset in the world in the next 48 months. What is it? It's all of the smart money in the world running from risk, running from the past toward the future, from something less secure to something more secure. And they're doing it in the most visible way with their capital. This is a map of the wealth distribution in the world, about $900 trillion. If you break it into uses, half of it is just a store of value. We're long-term, we're preserving our capital for the long term. We just want to keep our money. The other half are assets held for utility. I want to do something with the asset. If you drill into the 450 trillion, you realize the problem is that long-term capital is being dissipated and decimated by fires, by floods, by famines, by tariffs, by wars, by competition, by rust, by obsolescence, by torts, by traffic, you name it, right? What's that cost? That costs $10 trillion a year. There's people go, well, what is Bitcoin's use case? The use case is to not suffer $10 trillion a year of damage from entropy, from inflation, from chaos, from the future. Bitcoin's an asset without the financial risk of a currency, a bond, a stock, and it doesn't have the physical risk of real estate and property. And we're stripping away the counterparty risk to everything. And so we're moving away from risk, and what that means is that as the word spreads that there's an opportunity to keep your money without taking risk, long-term capital is being merged into the Bitcoin network. The greatest digital transformation of the 21st century, it isn't the transformation of music, it isn't the transformation of your photos, your communications, your Facebook friends, or educational videos, although each of those things made $1 trillion company. The greatest digital transformation is the transformation of capital. So it's the transformation of 450 trillion. What's it worth? It's worth half of everything. It's half of everything. That's the transformation. Digital capital is stronger, faster, and smarter capital. It's everything you don't like about the building stripped away, and you've got an invisible, indestructible, immortal, teleportable building. It's a better building. It's global capital. It's everybody that's living in Asia and Africa and South America would move to the U.S. if they could. They'd move their money to the U.S. if they could. They want the currency of the U.S. They want the property of the U.S. They want the security of the U.S. They want the values of the U.S. But they can't have it. So the second best thing they can have is move their money into the Bitcoin network, which has all of the values, protections, and securities of the U.S. Bitcoin is immortal capital, right? You can keep your money for 1,000 years. A 10 basis point fee works out to a useful lifetime of 1,000 years. All the other long-term capital assets have a life of 10 to 100 years. Find a business you want to invest in that'll be around for 500 years. Find a building that will last for 500 years. Find a bond that will pay off in 500 years. Find a piece of art that'll still be legible in 500 years. And finally, what we all know in this room is that Bitcoin is, and digital capital is ethical capital. It's the only thing in this world you can truly own. If you have possession of the keys, if you have possession of the knowledge of where the keys might be, you own the thing. No one can take the thing away from you. Everything else you have in this world, you own at the pleasure of someone more powerful than you until they decide to take it away from you. Satoshi gave us property rights, sound money, sovereign money. It's a network, but what is it? It's the world's most powerful network. 800 exahash. What's the measure of digital power? It's exahash. 20 gigawatts. All the electricity, all the power that fires up the U.S. Navy. It's also got the most economic power. My company spent $33 billion to buy 2.4% of the network. Do the math in your head, you'll realize there's $1 trillion of real money that has flowed into this network, and there's $1 trillion of smart money behind it. It's the world's most global, fault-tolerant, unstoppable network. Each of those ASIC chips is hundreds of thousands of laptop computers. You'd need trillions and trillions of computers to dent this network. And then, of course, many people say, oh, I get it, it's a network effect. It must be a network. Yeah. Well, it's not a Metcalfean network. That's just enough information about networks to hurt yourself. It's not getting more powerful with the square of the number of nodes. It's getting more powerful based upon the amount of mass, energy, and capital flowing in the network. It's a Newtonian network, like the solar system. When the white dwarf comes past your planet, it's going to suck the atmosphere off your planet. A white dwarf is not the same as an asteroid the same size. They are different. Bitcoin is the brightest thing in the financial universe, right? Heat and light. It's the most interesting. It's growing stronger. It's growing hotter. It's growing denser as it draws the capital of the world into its orbit. What capital? Physical capital. People are selling their buildings. Financial capital. They're going to trade out their low-grade bonds, their currencies in third world and in the second world. Foreign capital. They're going to sell their Siberian real warehouses and their Russian natural gas rights. It's drawing antiquated capital, the capital of the 20th century. It's drawing smart capital. Anybody that thought about it and thought, do I want to be invested in something that's going to decay or be destroyed over time by 100 uncertain risks, or do I want to just keep my money in cyberspace? And then digital capital, right? The AIs, they don't get the bank account. As the economy digitizes, people want to move digital money at the speed of light with a million transactions a second. You're not doing it with a Siberian warehouse. You're not doing it with natural gas or gold. You're not going to do it with any 20th century asset. Where is it headed? Well, there's an open source model. You can download it on GitHub called Bitcoin 24. Plug in your own assumptions. Our assumptions, well, Bitcoin's currently 22 basis points of the global economy. That's $2 trillion. Over 20 years, right now it's been growing about 60% a year. If it decelerates from 60% a year to 20% a year, the average return is going to be 29% a year over the 20 years. That is the base case. That arrives at a price of $13 million a Bitcoin in USD terms, or $280 trillion in the network. Does the world turn upside down? No. What happens? Well, everything pretty much stays the same, except for those that embrace Bitcoin get rich and powerful. Those that don't embrace Bitcoin get weaker and poorer. Otherwise, everything that you see in the world today will still be there in the world in 20 years. Bitcoin is not a threat to the dollar. The dollar is currency. Bitcoin is capital. In the modern world, there are plenty of academic economists. They will just recite ad infinitum. Well, money is a store of value, a medium of exchange, a unit of account. There, I told you. And they just haven't really thought about that past just rote memory. This is why you shouldn't rote memorize stuff in education. Think a little bit harder about what's going on here. If you need money for the next 4 weeks in Argentina, then you're using the peso. If you need money for the next 4 years in Argentina, you're using the dollar. If you need money for the next 40 years in Argentina and you're smart, you're using the Bitcoin. And so the dollar is competing, but is competing against the M2 money supply of the CNY, Chinese currency, European currency, Japanese currency. Right now we're about 17% of that. We should be able to grow to 30% of that. How? With digital currency. If U.S. banks and U.S. corporations can issue digital currencies backed by the U.S. Treasury, we will expand that supply of U.S. currency by $10 trillion, right? That's a digital asset strategy. That's why the stablecoin bill and the Genius Act matter. It is not capital. Bitcoin is less than 1% of the capital of the world. What does it compete with? Not the dollar. Bitcoin competes with property, equity, and bonds. Property, equity, and bonds. And what is it? It's 1%. And what is it going to? I just showed you the shocker $13 million Bitcoin forecast. That gets us to 13% of the capital in 2045. We have two strategies. Expand our currency to dominate the world with the digital currency of choice. Expand our capital to dominate the world with the digital capital of choice. Why should the U.S. want to be the Bitcoin superpower? You cannot remain a sovereign nation if you lose control of your airspace, outer space, or cyberspace. This is a truism. It's pretty important. We're not talking about making a little bit of money here. We're talking about defending the American way of life. A superpower has to keep the air routes open. You must be able to fly, not just fly from here to London. You need to be able to fly from New York to Chicago. If you look at what happened in the first Gulf War, we took control of Iraqi airspace. Within a week, their entire country was non-functioning. Some people would say within 48 hours they were non-functioning. This country won't function for 48 hours after we lose control of our airspace. How do we protect it? We have Air Force bases. We have military aircraft. This is evolving. It will continue to evolve. Drones, very sophisticated defense systems. We have to keep open our sea lanes. This is a truism for 1,000 years. The Carthaginians knew it. That's why the Romans destroyed them. The Carthaginians had destroyed the Venetian fleet. Every single port in the Mediterranean that was a Venetian port was also a Roman port, was also a Carthaginian port, was also a Phoenician port. Why? Because you must keep the sea lanes open if you would be a superpower. If I cut off your sea lanes, I choke your economy. The Japanese determined this or found this out in World War II. Sea power requires naval bases operating appropriate ships. A superpower has to keep its cyber channels open. What does that mean? It means your communication channels for digital information, but it also means your communication channels for digital energy. I need to be able to move a signal, but I need to move a $10 billion chunk of money. I don't just need to keep the cyber channels open around the world. It's not just I want to move that information or that energy between New York and Tokyo. If I lose control of cyberspace over the United States, I can't move information between New York and Chicago. Right? You lose cyberspace, you'll lose your own digital economy. What would you do if your enemy got control of your cyberspace? You saw just, again, yesterday, you can't even log into X. Well, what happens when you can't log into your bank account? Cyber power requires Bitcoin miners operating ASICs, throwing up a wall of digital energy, and you want to hope that more than 50% of that is controlled by you or your allies. What does it mean to own cyberspace? If you want to be a Bitcoin superpower, you need to own the asset, own Bitcoin, but that's only half of it. Owning all of New York City and losing control of the sea lanes and the airspace above New York City is a Pyrrhic victory, right? You won't own it very long. It'll get shredded. You have to control the network, the cyber network, the digital energy network that flows around the world. AI is the future. The computers, the AIs, they're smarter than us. They're going to think faster than us. At some point, they'll be thinking 1,000,000 times a second, talking to each other, right? And if you want to build the greatest economy in the world, your cars need to drive themselves, the robots need to think, the factories need to think, and your agent needs to be thinking 1,000,000 times a second about how to do something useful for you. Digital intelligence requires digital energy, which has to be secured by digital power in order to engage in digital commerce. When I say digital commerce, I don't just mean buying trinkets on Amazon. I mean moving all of the money and securing all the assets of the world. I mean $950 trillion going to $4,000 trillion of assets. And it couldn't be clearer where that's headed right now. The unit of digital energy is the Satoshi. The unit of digital power is the exahash, right? What are the benefits to America of the Bitcoin strategy? Embrace Bitcoin, we own the 21st century. All the money, all the capital of the world is moving out of the 20th century. Everything that made sense, every educated financier was educated in the 20th century. They were taught a bunch of bromides, a bunch of rules. All of those rules probably made sense in the 20th century. The way we fought World War II is not the way we fight World War III. Every military doctrine, every financial doctrine, it might have been right at one point. It's not right any longer. Trillions of dollars of capital is going to flow from those physical and financial assets into digital, into the Bitcoin network. Okay, you might say, well, I'm making a strong assertion. Bitcoin is the digital capital network. I'm not just the one making that assertion. The President of the United States made that assertion last week. Explained by David Sachs on Friday night. He said, Bitcoin is the only crypto asset that is truly decentralized. It is special. Maybe in the future there might be some other digital capital. The U.S. government doesn't recognize any other digital capital, nor do we. And that's because 99% of the power in the crypto ecosystem is in the Bitcoin network. If you want to own cyberspace and own the future, you need to own it. Embrace Bitcoin and strengthen the dollar. We have the chance to establish, own, and control the global digital capital network that is Bitcoin. We can back the US dollar with Bitcoin reserves, the only monetary asset that is competitive to the dollar. If I need a liquid, fungible asset to capitalize a company or an institution, it's not real estate, it's not natural gas, it's not art, it's not private and public equity portfolios, it's not even going to be an index of equity. The only asset that I can use other than Bitcoin is US Treasuries everywhere in the world. If anybody ever decides to replace those, they'll replace them with Bitcoin. We should own both. Embrace Bitcoin, attract foreign capital. It's not just we're getting the 20th century money, we're getting the rest of the world's money. If I gave you money, if I took all your money, I dropped you in Africa and I said, you got to invest in a diversified portfolio of private and public equity and real estate or in Africa, or you can put your money into the digital capital network and move it anywhere else at the speed of light, and I gave you a choice to punch the orange button or leave it in Africa for 100 years, you would punch the orange button. Everybody else in the world's figuring out the same thing right now. That's why countries will make laws against it. That's why the Chinese have export controls on their capital. All of the capital will flow into the U.S. But if you can't physically come to the U.S., the next best thing is you flow into the digital capital network and you get all the protections of the U.S. And finally, you embrace Bitcoin, you empower Americans. It's American companies with Bitcoin on the balance sheet. They're going to outlast, outperform, and outlive their competitors. So American institutions that are holding Bitcoin, they're going to enrich their shareholders. The beneficiaries are us. And the last point, with the appropriate digital assets framework, we can become the bankers to the world. Right? When we export Bitcoin to the world, we're exporting our values: sovereignty, sound money, integrity, property rights. When we export digital currency, we're literally exporting our currency. If we create other digital securities or digital tokens, we'll be exporting our companies, our ideas, our securities, our financial products to the world. We can dominate this industry. So how should the U.S. pursue a Bitcoin strategy? Well, Senator Lummis has given us a clear guideline with the Bitcoin Act in Nashville in July. And what the Bitcoin Act said, it said, let's acquire 1 million Bitcoin over a 5-year period in a programmatic, disciplined fashion, transparent to all. And so let's consider the consequences of this strategy. Well, first of all, last week, the president signed the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve Act or order. If we hold that 200,000 Bitcoin for the next 20 years, even though you see a flat line on the screen, the flat line is worth $3 trillion. So that's the value of doing nothing. Sometimes people think that you have to do something to make money. Sometimes the absence of doing awful and stupid things is making money. Doing stuff is highly overrated if the stuff is trading or selling your Bitcoin. The Lummis bill would acquire 1 million Bitcoin or 1.2 million Bitcoin. If you look at the consequences of that over the time frame, it's worth $16 trillion to the nation. If you get a bit more aggressive and we go for another million, it's worth $34 trillion to the nation. In this case, there's a bit of reflexivity. If the United States starts to more aggressively stockpile Bitcoin, it's going to accelerate the growth of the network. It's going to accelerate capital flowing in the network. It's going to increase and expand the overall digital capital network. If we move to a triple max strategy, you'll end up with 4 million Bitcoin. That's worth $73 trillion to America. And of course, President Trump has laid out a guideline. We should be the superpower. If you want a superpower strategy, here's a superpower strategy. Acquire Bitcoin consistently. By the way, over what time frame? consistently daily between now and the 0.99. 0.99 is January of the year 2035, the point at which 99% of the Bitcoin supply has been mined. The asset becomes effectively capped for all practical purposes because the last 1% comes out over 100 years. 0.99 between now and then you've got 10 years for the digital gold rush. You should get your Bitcoin before there's no more Bitcoin for you. And you can see here, in this strategy, we acquire it consistently, and then we use surpluses from the U.S. government to continue to save in Bitcoin. It's worth $106 trillion to the United States. And so what does that look like? Well, the Lummis plan, which is grand, is modest in some ways, and a modest strategic Bitcoin reserve plan neutralizes the national debt. Sometimes doing modest things are actually brilliant as long as you do the thing. It's like the people that bought just a little bit of Bitcoin in 2012. It was a modest investment. It made them billionaires. A modest thing 20 years in advance is a brilliant thing. If you're more aggressive, the triple max plan negates the national debt. The superpower plan creates a global superpower. We bought 78% of the United States for $40 million. $40 million purchased nearly 80% of this country. Think about it for a second. Bitcoin is the greatest opportunity of the 21st century, right? It's worth anywhere from $3 trillion to $106 trillion, depending upon how programmatic and aggressive we want to pursue this opportunity. These opportunities don't come along often. This is the once-in-a-century opportunity. And as Donald Trump has said, never sell your Bitcoin. And I'll leave you with the final thought. What happens if we allow another nation to claim title to Bitcoin superpower? If we don't claim it, we give them control of the network. We give them all the wealth in the world. We risk being impoverished and imperiled by a hostile nation that controls all the world's digital energy. You could have clung to your glass beads when the world went to the gold standard. You could have clung to your steam engines when the world went to internal combustion. You know, you could have kept your wood-burning stoves when Rockefeller offered you petroleum. We could have dismissed nuclear power. We once had another project. We had a Manhattan Project. It was a large investment in nuclear energy. Do you want to control the world's digital energy? Because the digital economy will run on digital energy. The choices are either prosperity or poverty in the 21st century. Bitcoin is manifest destiny for America. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. It is now my great honor and privilege to introduce an American entrepreneur, a political commentator, and perhaps, I think a lot of us here agree, the next Governor of Ohio, Vivek Ramaswamy.
As dressed up as I am. I like this. This is a nice audience. It's good to be here, and great to hear Michael's comments. I want to thank all of you for taking an interest in a subject that falls outside of the standard Washington talking point menu, at least as of now, but which is going to be highly relevant to our future. And frankly, I'm grateful to President Trump for being the first president in modern history that has taken a serious interest in the future of really all of the sectors in the future, but including Bitcoin and the future of related crypto policies. And I think that part of the golden age for America will be a golden age of not just Bitcoin, but thoughtfulness about our approach to the future of Bitcoin. And that's part of what the Bitcoin Policy Institute is opening up today, is dialogue around an important subject that we, I think, have not yet wrapped our heads around as policymakers. And I want to say thank you for the invitation today. It's why I wanted to be here. Now, I'm going to approach this discussion from a little different lens than Michael, whose tail end of remarks I just heard. I think he did a fantastic job. A little different than the standard case you might hear for the accumulation of a Bitcoin strategic reserve or stockpile. You could define these terms differently. That's a little bit more generalizable. It's not grounded on a bullish view on Bitcoin, though I do happen to own Bitcoin and I'm bullish on Bitcoin. Doesn't have to do with even thinking about the national strategic position of the United States, as you just heard from Michael Saylor, and I agree with a lot of what he said. But it's a different vantage point altogether, grounded in the principle of capital discipline. I'll tell you what I mean. For the last decade and a half, we have operated in an era of easy money. This isn't a controversial statement to make. We have lived in an era of money raining from on high like the Federal Reserve, like manna coming from heaven, or sometimes, as I might have described it, showering a room full of cocaine addicts with cocaine. And what that has done is it has suspended the usual conditions of decision-making by any institution, by a federal government, by a state government, by a corporation, by a nonprofit, by a foundation. Usually these institutions operate under conditions of capital scarcity. And there's a complicated way of explaining what I'm about to describe. I'm going to go with the simpler way. I have an old principle that said that if you can't explain it to a ninth grader, you probably don't understand it yourself. So we're going to go with the simple way today. Under conditions of capital scarcity, an institution has to make a choice of how it allocates its capital. Do I spend it on project A, or do I spend it on project B because my resources are finite? Perhaps that is a biotech or pharmaceutical company. It's my background as an entrepreneur before I entered the field of public life. Am I going to spend it on this particular drug for, I don't know, endometriosis, or am I going to spend it on this particular other alternative drug for the treatment of a rare genetic disease? Perhaps it's where you might expend your resources as an energy company. Am I going to explore for more oil and gas here, or am I going to spend more on a refinery project over here? It's the basic questions of capital allocation under times of scarcity. What happened over the last 15 years and the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis and the low interest rate policies that persisted for about a decade and a half is that capital effectively became free to everybody because of the policies adopted not only by the U.S. Federal Reserve, but by central banks around the world. Under conditions of capital scarcity, you no longer have to decide between project A and B because functionally, you can just pursue both of them at the same time. Now that led, particularly in the case of government behavior, to a level of overspending, government overspending, that created the inflation that began to kick in over the last couple of years, which instead then created a different response from the Federal Reserve and likely from other central banks around the world to raise interest rates and to exit the period of infinite capital for each of these institutions. And so what's going to happen, in the same way that we had a persistent period of infinite capital, of the absence of capital scarcity, we're now going to enter a new, and I believe even more persistent era of scarce capital once again. It's going to have a disciplining effect on every institution, from the private sector to the public. And that means that institutions, from nonprofits to companies to state governments to a federal government, are going to have to reconsider, what is my hurdle rate for a given project? What is my opportunity cost capital? Where else could I be parking this money? At what rate of return? And to compare that to the internal rate of return on a different project that I might pursue. I'm going to give you the simple version. Of this. In a simple version of the world, I would break it down into two categories of projects that a company, a nonprofit, a state government, or a national government could pursue. We'll consider areas of capital investment, and areas of high-risk capital investment. Now, of course, this two-category model is false. It's a continuously varying spectrum of risk, but for the purpose of simplicity, consider it this way. There's low risk, let's say you're a company. There's a low risk project you could pursue and a high risk project you could pursue. What ought to be your hurdle rate of return for a low risk project as a corporation? The default is a U.S. Treasury. You could think about the default is a U.S. Treasury. You could think about the duration, 3 months, 10-year, whatever it is. Right now, 10-year U.S. Treasuries are yielding what? Somewhere between, give or take over the course of the next year, 4 to 5%. That's your hurdle rate of return. To say that as a company, I'm sitting on a safe, functionally, we hope it is, risk-free instrument for the long run and collect 4 to 5%. So if I'm going to take on a different project internally, even a low-risk project at my company or my nonprofit or my institution, it better earn more than 4 to 5%, or else I would rather just leave it parked in the low-risk instrument. That creates, again, a hurdle rate for risk-adjusted return that we didn't have under conditions of infinite capital over the last 15 years. This is a new calculus that's really been traditionally the business decision that's back now, again in the United States. What about for your hurdle rate for a higher risk project? That's really the question at issue. There isn't today a standard for what your hurdle rate ought to be. There's a lot of mumbo jumbo in financial theory about, well, it should be the LIBOR or the U.S. 10-year Treasury rate plus some arbitrarily derived rate of return, plus 5%, plus 500 points or whatever it is. It's really just economic mumbo jumbo. I mean, I come from even the world in biotech investing and biotech capital allocation. People make up what the opportunity cost is for the rate of return. I believe that in the next 10 to 15 years, in the new era of scarce capital, where we are in need of institutions in need of identifying what their hurdle rate of return is going to be, for low-risk projects, it is and ought to be the 10-year Treasury yield. But for higher risk projects that any company or any other institution contemplates, I believe the expected long-run rate of return on Bitcoin will set the hurdle rate for internal capital investment. And the reasons why are clear because they're tied to the inherent attributes of Bitcoin itself. It has a fixed supply defined by a mathematical formula. As I've often said in other contexts, God is real, math is math, and pretty much everything else is negotiable, at least subject to change over time. Think about alternative hurdles of what you might use as your rate of return, even other commodities, even gold. We could think about the supply as really being variable over a long enough time horizon, the amount of gold we might discover on planet Earth. In an era of interplanetary exploration, sounds like kooky stuff to talk about, but just think about it very pragmatically. As we eventually at least reach and eventually maybe even colonize other planets, I believe it is more likely than not that we will discover large reserves of gold, AU, on the periodic table, same as we will of other elements on other planets as well. The supply of gold, let alone even the cost of storing it, are unlikely to be fixed. You're not going to find Bitcoin on another planet because it's not defined by the laws of nature, which our understanding of them continues to evolve and change anyway. It's defined by the laws of math, on which our understanding over time because it is fixed in a way that's not subject to changing constraints in the natural world. So back to the question of when you think about what ought to be your hurdle rate of return for higher risk projects as a company, as a nonprofit, as a state government or a federal government, I believe we're going to see the emergence of Bitcoin in a way that we haven't in the last 10 years. Why haven't we seen it in the last 10 years? Because we haven't needed hurdle rates in the first place. We haven't needed hurdle rates for low-risk projects. We haven't needed hurdle rates for higher-risk projects. That is now rapidly changing. Now, against the backdrop of what I've laid out, you could ask the question of, why have you limited this to be a hurdle rate of return for higher-risk projects than for lower-risk projects? Shouldn't Bitcoin just be the hurdle rate of return for everything, period, rather than the U.S. Treasury? And this is where, I guess I would draw on one of my experiences is if you care about somebody, you tell them the truth, and if you care about yourself, you tell them what they want to hear. I care about this community, and I consider myself part of it. I'm going to give you my perspective of the truth. And sometimes we get a little bit ahead of our skis in the Bitcoin world or the pro-Bitcoin world, in that right now we're not operating against a backdrop of where any institution really, or say for a really small number of institutions, we just heard from Michael Saylor, so I can't say no institutions, but almost no institutions have adopted or tethered any component of their hurdle rate of capital return to the Bitcoin standard. We're not going to a world where it is automatically tomorrow going to be, now that's going to be the sole rate of return that we're going to compare any other project to. 10-year treasuries are going to be the standard for assessing low-risk allocations of capital. But I think it would be a seismic step forward, and I think it is going to be a seismic step forward to say that even though the volatility of an asset like Bitcoin is obviously much greater than that of U.S. Treasuries, so too has been the rate of return on Bitcoin over the course of the last 10 years compared to those Treasuries. For the higher risk, higher return stratum of where you measure what your hurdle rate is for your rate of return on a project, I believe Bitcoin will emerge as that new standard. And if you believe that, as I do, I think that makes for probably the most compelling case for any institution, governmental to non-governmental, to for-profit to non-profit, holding some level of a reserve of Bitcoin. It helps to be bullish on it for the long run because you believe that asset's going to appreciate. But what it does is it tethers your institution's behavior under conditions of capital scarcity to something of fixed supply that has a fixed store of value that's likely to go up over the course of time. That is a different case for actually holding Bitcoin, even if you're a corporation. So we're talking about this at the level of the national stockpile or the national strategic reserve. But sometimes the case becomes clearer if you even look at it in the case of a company. If your company's sitting on a stockpile of cash, you're going to hold a lot of it. A lot of them do today in the form of U.S. Treasuries. Very few of them are holding those reserves in the form of Bitcoin today. I believe that is likely to change. Why do I believe it's likely to change? I believe over time, companies and institutions tend to do what they should do, and if they don't, others are going to do the same thing and outcompete them out of business. This is where I'm actually intrigued and proud of where one of the companies that I founded, called Strive, has actually played an early role in beginning to help catalyze that change. Strive was a firm I founded several years ago to push back against ESG overreach in capital markets. And what you saw in corporate America was many companies were in that realm adopting policies that were hostile to their own self-interest. Energy companies producing less oil and gas even under times where it would have been more profitable to do so in the name of environmental mandates. And what Strive did at that time, I give this to you as backdrop for what I'm about to tell you, was vote proxies on behalf of the assets that it managed in the boardrooms of these companies, affecting the behavior in these boardrooms, against those ESG policies in favor of whatever policies maximized actual overall value for that corporation. At the time we began and embarked on that project, it was unthinkable that we would be where we are today, where peak ESG is in the rearview mirror just a few years later. A lot of that private sector efficiency, closing the inefficiency gaps, they closed far more quickly than you'd ever expect from the benefit of the vantage point of a rearview mirror and the benefit of retrospect. I think we're going to see the same thing with respect to the corporate stockpiling of Bitcoin. Strive actually recently became one of the few, if not only institutional asset managers, certainly one of the few, that voted in favor of a shareholder proposal at Microsoft to be able to put Bitcoin on its balance sheet. And that feels to me about as contrarian today as it did several years ago to vote against the ESG policies in the boardrooms of companies like Exxon and Chevron. And as unthinkable as it was that ESG would be in the rearview mirror then, how quickly we saw that change catalyzed, I think that's what we're likely to be saying a few years from now, looking at just the normalization of companies saying that obviously now in an era of no longer free capital, we have to rethink what our hurdle rates of return actually are from projects that go from low risk to high risk. And so on the front end of change, it's often hard to imagine what that change looks like. It often seems daunting, impossible, or you imagine time horizons that are measured in decades rather than years. And then in retrospect, what you realize is if that was obvious, if it was actually grounded in truth, things tend to happen far more quickly than we actually anticipate. And so the thing that we ought to debate isn't the time horizon over which it happens, but the validity of the argument of whether or not the underlying proposition is true. And I think we ought to have room for reasonable debate about this. Somebody might make, what's the best possible counter-argument to the view that I've shared here? I try to think about that, otherwise you don't really understand what you believe. One argument could be, no, we should just put it in the S&P 500. That's your opportunity cost for your rate of return. Well, if you are a company that is in the S&P 500 or aspires to be, that has a certain kind of circularity to it, right? Because you think of yourself as allocating your capital to a certain opportunity cost of return on your capital in a way that's different from and diversified from the underlying risk of the projects that you're evaluating. It doesn't quite make sense to put it in that same asset class that you yourself are comprising and a part of. At the same time, it doesn't make sure to put it in 10-year U.S. Treasury yields. It's still being 4 to 5%. For the higher risk opportunity cost of capital that you're measuring against your internal rate of return on your project, 4 to 5% isn't going to cut it either. So I think you could take the same, try it on like a set of clothes for each of the alternative asset classes. And I think in the end, you're left with a less compelling case than you have for an asset class that is now here to stay, that has a demonstrated history, now measured in decades rather than years, and has the attribute of a fixed, mathematically defined supply, a characteristic that even gold doesn't share. And by the way, gold used to historically be that hurdle rate for that opportunity cost of capital for institutions holding gold in their reserves. That's why I believe that it is going to be, I can't tell you when it's going to be, whether it's going to be next month or next year. I don't think it's going to be the next decade that you begin to see more private sector institutions, nonprofits and corporations included, holding their own reserves, call them stockpiles or reserves of Bitcoin in their own treasury. And I think that is going to happen even sooner than you see sovereigns actually adopting the same, both states, nations, and including our own. And the reason I say that is usually you see the sovereign behavior follow that direction in which the private sector is already headed on its own. One of the things I've learned is politicians, they tend to be followers, not leaders. I do think we have an exception right now in the White House of a guy who is a business leader that happens to be serving as the U.S. president. So we do live in an exceptional era in the United States right now. But as a general rule of thumb, I think people in Washington, D.C., I don't mean this as a slight, it's just a pattern of how history tends to work, take their cues from the private sector. Funny, people even look at decisions or bold decisions that were made, like Brown versus Board of Education, 9-0 Supreme Court decision that ended segregation in our schools. The little left out fact of that, even in the narratives here in D.C., is that was already, desegregation was already trending. It was already a horse that had left the barn. All the D.C., in this case not policymaker but court, came in with a unanimous decision to do was to put a stamp, its imprimatur, to finalize a trend that was already inescapably and irreversibly underway in America. Now, to bring it back to the realm from civil rights and desegregation to the realm of Bitcoin and financial markets, I think we're actually going to see basically the same thing in the realm that we're here to talk about today, is that private institutions, under this condition of capital scarcity, the renewed conditions, I should say, the normalized conditions even of capital scarcity, are going to take their cues from private sector actors that look themselves in the mirror and ask themselves, to be competitive, they have to now make decisions again based on what the opportunity cost of capital is or isn't. And it will only be the natural extension of that, the natural and unavoidable consequence that nations and states follow suit in making the same kinds of decisions for themselves. So that was a bit of a technocratic or rather dry case, if I may say, for why I believe we ought to have a strategic stockpile, reserve, whatever you want to call it. These names can be used interchangeably. They have different connotations. Is not just a Bitcoin to the moon mantra, although that might be a little more arousing. And I could give you that version of it. But I think the real reason is grounded in just first principles of how an institution ought to make decisions under conditions of capital scarcity, as we require hurdle rates for return. And my prediction, not always right about these things, but my prediction is that you're actually going to see the private sector move more quickly in this direction, could be quite quickly in this direction, sooner than you actually see sovereigns move. But very quickly thereafter, the sovereigns will line up and follow suit in a way that seems unthinkable today, but in retrospect a few years from now will seem the obvious consequence of the conditions and the era that we were in, much as we saw in the evolution and devolution away from ESG. I'll close. I'm going to violate a rule I usually apply in these speeches. Is the advice I give for people asking me for advice on giving an effective speech is you make one point, make it well, and then get off stage before your time is up. My time is effectively up, and I already made my one point, but I'm going to violate my rule anyway and just here make a second point anyhow, because I think this one is also important. In some sense, it has nothing to do with Bitcoin. And in another sense, I think it has everything to do with Bitcoin. I think we live in a moment in our national history where there is a question confronting us that we are still yet to answer decisively. It's the question of who we are as Americans. We're a disparate people spread across a vast geographic expanse, bound together by what exactly? It's the question of our time. We don't have a common religion. We don't have a common race or ethnicity. These are things that bind most nations together, a common genetic lineage, a common heritage. That's not us. Never has been, certainly isn't today. What is it that binds us together across those different, diverse attributes? I believe it is a common creed, an ethos that binds us together as Americans. It is an ethos captured in the Declaration of Independence that set the country into motion 250 years ago. It is an ethos actualized, concretized in the U.S. Constitution, which I view as the greatest operating manual for a nation in human history. But it's more than just what the words are in the Constitution or the technical operating strictures of our founding documents. It is an ethos that says that no matter who you are or where you came from or what your skin color is or where your parents came from, that you have an opportunity to be your own hero in the American landscape without any government or bureaucracy standing in your way. You could be a hero as a businessman. You could be a hero as an entrepreneur. You could be a hero as a national leader at the White House to a governor's mansion. You could also be a hero by being a cop or a police officer or a parent or a teacher or a dutiful son or daughter taking care of his elder parent in a nursing home, or somebody who just works hard for your family as a plumber and allows yourself to be the breadwinner for a family that gives your kids the American dream that's a better one than you had. That's what America is at our best. We're a nation founded on the freedom of every individual, no matter what your God-given gift is, distinct from every other person in the world, to use that unique God-given attribute to achieve the maximum of your potential in this country without a government or bureaucracy standing in your way. That, I believe, is who we are at our core. And we as human beings, we need the symbols that remind us of that from time to time. It is what I believe is in part codified in the symbology of the American flag right behind me here today. I think we live in a moment where we have lost those hero narratives, where those hero narratives for the next generation of aspiring heroes are missing. I believe that's what accounts for the growing epidemic of depression, anxiety, fentanyl, suicide. And against that backdrop, I don't want to oversell this or overbuild this up, but I think there's a role to recognize that ethos of America and the way in which that at least overlaps with the ethos of Bitcoin as well. I think Bitcoin and what it represents, more than as a financial asset, also helps fill that void, fill that hunger for a symbol, a reminder of what American greatness was all about. And I think it makes that in the national context an even more fitting asset to fill our national stockpiles and national strategic reserves with something that not only, most importantly, has the financial attributes that I laid out earlier, but even more importantly for the long run, also in a moment where we lack the symbols of reminding ourselves and our next future generations of who we are, helps to fill that void by embracing capitalism rather than apologizing for it, by embracing success rather than victimhood. We're victors, not victims. That's who we are. And as much as I believe that's the American creed, that'd be the creed that I would like to see embodied in the future of Bitcoin. And I'll close with this, also the policies that are set surrounding not only the future of Bitcoin, but more generally, the future of crypto policy in America. I don't want to see us fall into a trap where we make the very mistakes in regulating and constraining and use crony capitalism to weed out and and eliminate competitors. That's what you see in other industries. That's what you see through all of the course of human history and its interface between business and government. I think what makes the future of Bitcoin, and I'm not going to conflate them, but more broadly the future of crypto policy interesting and important, is that if the ethos of Bitcoin and the ethos of the character of the asset class we're talking about today is distinct and embodies the American spirit, then I want to make sure that we here in America don't adopt some of the same cronyist or market-limiting or competition-limiting forces that have tempted us in other regulated industries to use our future policy framework in the future of Bitcoin and crypto policy more generally to embrace those principles of freedom and competition without apology. And I offer that both as hopefully a note of inspiration as well as a note of caution as we enter what I believe is a new golden age, not just for America, but a new golden age for innovation in America. And I do believe that Bitcoin will be a critical and important part of it. Thank you for having me today, guys. God bless you and our great country. And come visit Ohio. I appreciate it. Thank you.
As we're getting set up for a fireside that I am really excited about, wanted to make a few quick announcements. One, I noticed there's a number of people standing in the back. There are plenty of open seats here on the front row. There's also gallery seating upstairs if anyone is looking for a seat. So up next, we have a fireside chat between my good friend Jack Mallers, the founder and CEO of Strike, and the king of stablecoins, the CEO of Tether, Paolo Ardoino. Thank you so much, and I'm really looking forward to this. While we're waiting for Jack and Paolo, given that I'm neither of them, we will have a coffee break after this. So that'll be about 10 minutes. Following that, we will have a presentation from BPI's new executive director, Matthew Pines. And there they are, the king of stablecoins and the CEO of Strike, Paolo and Jack, right now. Thanks, guys.
Hello, everyone.
All right, what's going on, DC? Thanks for having us. As David mentioned, I'm Jack. I'm the CEO of Strike, and I'm joined by the one and only Paolo, CEO of Tether and CTO of Bitfinex. How are you, my friend?
I'm great. Thank you very much, Jack. And I'm very grateful to be here. This is my first time in America. So I'm very thrilled to be here.
First react, how do you like our seed oils? A little red 40? Kidding. All right, I think we need to give our nation's capital a little context on your business.
Sure.
I know everyone sees the profits and the profits per employee, very impressive, but some of the numbers, I run a business myself, 400 million wallets, so 400 million users, you're adding 30 million users a quarter, which for simpler math, that's 10 million a month. Simpler math, that's over 250,000 a day. Who are you selling your product to? And what product are you selling that's reached? I mean, these are numbers that would make a social network like Twitter and X blush. And you're selling a financial service. Who is using this product, and what product exactly has reached such widespread product market fit?
Right, yeah. So everyone talks about stable coins with the US Act, right? So in the US, you would use stable coins for payments and programmable money and all that, right? There is a lot of talk. I think tomorrow there is a hearing about that. But that is cool. That is very nice tech. The reality is that stable coins are much more important for billions of people that differently than compared to Americans or Europeans, these people, these communities don't have other ways to pay. In the US, you can pay with Zelle, with PayPal, you have Cash App, you have hundreds of ways to pay. But if you go in, for example, in Africa, in Central South America, in Turkey, in Asia, there are hundreds of millions of people that are unbanked, right? 3 billion people in this world, so almost half of the population, does not have access to financial services. They use mobile money with the phone credit, they use cash and all that, but they are not part of the digital economy at all. They cannot send wires. They are completely cut off. They are not bad people. Their only problem, if you want to call it problem, is that they are too poor of being of interest of banks. So in order to be of interest of a bank, you need to generate $100, $150 per year in commissions. But if, for example, in Haiti, the average salary is $1.34 per day, it makes it very hard for you to be banked. And on the other side, also, the other part is that these people live in high inflation countries where, for example, Turkey, the inflation last year, I think, was 50%. And the national currency, the Turkish lira, devaluated 80% against the US dollar in the last 5 years. And, for example, the peso argentino devaluated 98% against the dollar from the last default of the country. So, and every time in the last 8 years, Argentina, for example, defaulted many times. So put yourselves in the shoes of someone that every single decade was in a country that defaulted, or basically you may put yourself in the shoes of a father of family in Turkey that works from January to December, and at the end of the year, after 1 year of hard work, is poorer compared to the beginning of the year, right? So this is our user base. So hundreds of millions of people that need a dollar because their national currency is very bad, cannot allow them to give a better future to their children, and they don't want to speculate. They don't want to buy all the altcoins and all that. They just need a dollar, simple like that. So Tether in 2014 Tether is the creator of the stablecoin, the first stablecoin, this technology. And, you know, at the beginning we thought, oh, well, this will be a $100 million market cap token, and now it's almost 143 billion, and is growing rapidly. And sounds crazy, but, you know, Tether is the company that brought financial freedom and financial inclusion to hundreds of millions of people. I don't want to be or sound cocky or disrespectful, but we heard so much about financial inclusion, how it was important and all that. This is the financial inclusion is the topic of the 21st century. But I believe there is no company, I mean, we are not an NGO, we are not a charity. Well, there are so many NGOs and charities that raise so much money to do financial inclusion, and we don't see them anywhere in the countries where we are. We did much more for financial inclusion with hundreds of millions of people than anyone else in the world. And while we are doing that, we are buying back the US debt. So right now we have around $115 billion of US treasuries. We are not a country, we are a small company, we are a small Tether. But if we were a country, we would be the 18th country in terms of ownership of US debt. So, and if you think about it, we also put the US debt, we make the US debt much more resilient, so that right now, for example, you had one single decision maker in China that 3 years ago he had control over almost $3 trillion of US debt, and now instead they decided to sell a good chunk of it, and now there is China has only 770 billion in US debt, and with the USDT that cannot happen, right? So we are every one of our 400 million users is a different brain, is a different mind, is a different person. So they will, all these 400 million people will not wake up one single day all together thinking, oh, now let's redeem Tether and so we can sell the US debt. No. So we decentralized the US debt. We make them more resilient. We are every single day with our boots on the ground building infrastructure for the US dollar and Bitcoin, by the way, everywhere in the world. So everywhere we go, we bring Bitcoin and we bring the US dollar, we do education, and we are in the trenches. I mean, we never approach a financial institution around the world. We never started top down. We always go bottom up. We build kiosks in Africa with solar panels on top. Inside you find batteries, and we sell subscriptions to people in Africa for $3 USDT per month, so they can swap these batteries 4 times. We have already 300,000 customers and several million swaps of these batteries. So this is how there are 600 million people in Africa that don't have electricity at home. So on one side, we're building infrastructure for electricity so that they can power smartphones, they can power small computers and small televisions with these 145 volts batteries. But on the other side, we also bring them and teach them about Bitcoin and US dollar. That is something that, of course, they prefer much more than, for example, the Nigerian Naira. So this is every single day we are in the trenches, building the biggest distribution network, physical and digital, for US dollars, but not only for that, for Bitcoin, for education, and for any other product that our company is producing or will produce in the future.
Yeah, amazing. I think there's a few things you said there I want to highlight. One is who your customer is. You're talking about African countries, Latin American countries. These is like where you're seeing a lot of the growth. What I find fascinating is I think Tether's largely misunderstood, I would say, because it's not competing with Chase Bank. I think a lot of the times you see these headlines by certain media that maybe have it wrong, and that you guys are going after entirely different customers. In fact, Chase can't have 400 million customers. There's not 400 million Americans. So I think that is what's fascinating. And hearing Scott Bessent of the U.S. Treasury say in a recent remark that he views stablecoins as strategic in his plans for the dollar. In the way I think that you guys are onboarding, an Argentine cab driver onto the dollar, onto being a purchaser of U.S. debt at such a scale that you're comparable to countries. Can you talk to who do you think your true competition is? Who's competing for your customer in how you're selling the dollar and onboarding folks into bringing demand for U.S. debt? And can you comment on Bessent's remarks and that he views stablecoins, which you guys are the majority of, if not the entire market, how he views that as strategic? How do you think you're strategic to America, and who do you view as a true competitor? Would you agree that Chase Bank, as it stands today, is a great business, but not necessarily competing for the same customers and selling the same product as you?
Yeah, good point. So of the 400 million customers that we have, I think Chase will onboard 4, not 4 million, but 4, just because, again, our people are simple people, poor, live in foreign countries. They cannot buy securities. They don't care about it. Their immediate problem is how they can, for the first time in their lives, they can start saving and accruing some wealth to give a better future to their children. So this is our user base. And all alone, like taken, one by one, of course they are small, they are hard to become a business, but if you have hundreds or millions of them, they become a powerhouse. It's a peer-to-peer powerhouse of wealth that can altogether make the difference, and hence also make a difference for the U.S. debt. I think that the importance of this moment in time is much bigger than I think many understand. So we all saw what happened with DeepSeek and AI. So the US had a DeepSeek moment for artificial intelligence. So when I say DeepSeek moment, means the US announced $500 billion in investment in artificial intelligence infrastructure. The next day, DeepSeek was announced, the next day. So it was clear that DeepSeek was already in the pockets and was there waiting for the right moment to be announced. Imagine, and that was bad, all the markets react badly, and actually it's going to change, I think, dramatically how artificial intelligence will be developed, because now you know that if you try to be too close, if you try to do, if you create your own models, you don't disclose them, someone else, like a small company in China, can build the model, open source it, and will kill completely your business. But leave that aside. It's clear that there are antagonists, for example, to the United States, and they will look for a DeepSeek moment for the US dollar hegemony. And that will come. So we have to be prepared for it. A few years ago, BRICS announced a digital currency based on a basket of assets. And pardon me my French, but if you put many little pieces of shit together, you cannot make chocolate. I'm sure that the headline on the Wall Street Journal will be Arduino starts swearing in the US. But now they realize that, and then they start thinking, okay, what is better than that the basket of national currency will be a gold-backed digital currency. And if you see what happened, or what is happening now, is that every single BRICS nation is buying incredible quantities of gold. China is buying infinite amount of gold, India the same, and many other central banks in BRICS countries. So they are preparing to launch an attack to the US dollar. I don't have any doubt about it. If you go everywhere, BRICS nations are buying, if you go on all the emerging markets in Africa, also in Central and South America, BRICS nations are creating infrastructure, they are creating airports, ports, highways, schools, libraries, everything. So as soon as, I believe that if Tether fails, if USDT will not be there in 10 years, I mean, I think that USDT and Tether is the stronghold for the US dollar hegemony in all these countries, because we are alone there, right? So there is only us, and on the other side you have countries, a group of countries very determined to de-dollarize the world. And so that's quite interesting, because we are a small company. We are 150 people. Like, people look at our balance sheet, our profits, and all that, right? But it's very challenging. It's very interesting. It's very fascinating. I wouldn't do anything else in my life. I think that is one of the most interesting things I could do.
Yeah, I think, I mean, my interpretation of Besant's comments were, and this administration at large is trying to empower the private sector. They want to get regulation off of everyone's back. They want people to build. The way I think of Tether is, again, I mean, maybe I'm oversimplifying, but you're onboarding an Argentine cab driver as to be a purchaser of U.S. debt. It's beneficial to the United States. It's beneficial to the consumer. They clearly love this product. And it seems that the U.S. government recognizes the mutual relationship that you guys have, which I found fascinating, and it's very in line with this administration of let the private sector build, let people solve problems. Clearly, Tether's been very successful at being very efficient with 150 people making $14 billion a year. Did I get that right? 13.7, right?
13.7, yes.
Rounding error. So I found those comments interesting, which brings me to our last question. We got a few minutes left. I've known you a long time. We've both been in Bitcoin forever, for a decent amount of time. Where's Bitcoin tie into all this? What do you make of the strategic Bitcoin reserve, given this new administration's comments about stablecoins and them validating and asserting this neutral asset as a reserve asset globally? What do you think? And I mean, Tether is one of the largest holders of Bitcoin. You guys hold Bitcoin in your reserves. What do you make of the SBR and how the United States can use both Bitcoin and stablecoins?
Well, also as a Bitcoiner myself, it's tricky, right? Because on one side, I'm going around and really promoting the US dollar. And on the other side, we are also promoting Bitcoin a lot. And the tricky part is that when we go to a person in Africa or in Central South America, they have more immediate problems. So they always seek the US dollar compared to Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a superior product. It's the only currency that is governed by math, that will resist to the wrath of God, and that's something that is not controllable by humans, so that makes it safe for eternity. Now, people are having immediate problems, and also it's important to ensure that the United States remain a safe and sound economy, and the dollar remains a very trusted currency everywhere in the world, because the alternative will be much worse. Sometimes you have to pick, the best option, not the perfect option. And so what we are doing is actually with Tether, with our profits, we built our strategic Bitcoin reserves ourselves. So we have around 100,000 Bitcoin ourselves. And on the other side, I think that the fact that the US government acknowledged the importance of Bitcoin is incredible. I think that every other country will follow, other country should follow I've been good friends with the president of El Salvador. Actually, Jack Mallers is the person that actually started the movement in.
A little casual introduction, no big deal. Hey, you guys should meet.
And so this is a moment in time where I think in the next and for the next 20 years, the new global financial system will be reshaped. And I think that in the past, humanity was using gold. Now it's clear and clear that Bitcoin is the right way to do so, because then imagine trying to transport gold or gold from one country to another. Bitcoin is the way, and now I think that there was an announcement. There will be a strategy that will be not too public to acquire Bitcoins, because otherwise, like, they will just pump the price, and then there will be, you know, an holy shit moment where from every other country thinking, oh, I'm late, I don't have enough Bitcoin, and then the next financial reset in the entire history and all the future financial resets will be on Bitcoin. So this is everything that we needed. This is a stamp that Bitcoin needed, and then, you know, from now on, we just keep our heads down. We keep building better infrastructure, better tools and products. I mean, you guys at Strike are doing that already. I think that is now
BPI's Executive Director Matthew Pines here in a few minutes, so please begin taking your seats. Thank you.
All right, 1 minute warning. All right, we'll get started in 1 more minute. If the folks are in the lobby, you want to come in and take your seats? All right, good morning, everybody. Thanks for sticking around. I think we've got some really interesting panels coming up later this morning and some really interesting and exciting announcements from some congressmen. So I stand in between you and those really exciting events, but hopefully I'll make this titillating. So by way of brief introduction, Matthew Pines. I'm the new executive director of the Bitcoin Policy Institute. I have an interesting career. I studied physics and philosophy undergrad, did public policy, and then became a consultant for the US government for about 15 years, really helping the government think through kind of what-if scenarios, mostly really bad scenarios. Things like nuclear war, pandemics, cyber attacks, sort of the worst-case scenarios that the government has to look around those corners and develop prudent plans for. And about 5-6 years ago, I started to think about Bitcoin in that lens. What is the long-term strategic implication for the US government if Bitcoin were to continue to monetize, say to reach some meaningful fraction of gold, or even surpass gold? And I looked around at that time, I realized this wasn't a question that anyone was even thinking to ask, let alone attempt to answer. So I wrote the first white paper for the Bitcoin Policy Institute, which hopefully helped jumpstart this really impressive organization that I've been proud to help lead now and over the past month, and really kind of a fortuitous moment here. So I see this as kind of me trying to catch the football that I threw to myself about 5 years ago. So the topic of my talk this afternoon, which is going to be kind of a run-through of geopolitics and geoeconomics and Bitcoin. Hopefully it doesn't go too down into the weeds, but I want to try to get some of the abstract discussions we've had this morning, which are really about painting a picture of the future and the vision of Bitcoin in America, and to start thinking about the practical context in a pretty radically changing world order. So I'm going to highlight what I think are an honest look at the challenges that the U.S. faces in the geopolitical and geoeconomic sphere, highlight where I think challengers are coming from our rivals, and where Bitcoin is poised to play a significant role. So a quote from an important movie: "The days move along with regularity, one day indistinguishable from the next, a long continuous chain. Then suddenly, there is a change." We saw that change happen last Thursday, and it was foot-stomped by the Crypto Summit on Friday. And hopefully, I think today will act as a catalyst to push this even further. There's a particular quote in that executive order that I knew drew my attention, I'm sure drew the attention of national leaders and policymakers around the world, which was, because there is a fixed supply of Bitcoin, there is a strategic advantage to being among the first nations to create a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Kind of a remarkable statement for the President of the United States to put in an official executive order. I think the question we have to ask is why? Why is that the case? So a really simple scheme that I think about when I think about the geoeconomic system, the relationship between the global economy and geopolitics, essentially, is this three-legged stool that has underpinned the global order that we all grew up in, that has determined the course of our professional lives and the lives of our national leadership, is this relationship between the G7 countries, which provide the dominant source of credit and capital in the global system, intersecting with raw materials coming out of mostly OPEC countries, right? The core energy commodities that fuel the global system, and the sort of goods and manufacturing sector, which has been dominated increasingly so by China. And when those sort of three parts of the global order were in sort of frenemy mode, agreed to cooperate in a global order, you had relatively smooth sailing when it came to the basic structure of the global system. I think we've seen since COVID, and then accelerated after the Ukraine war, each element of that system come under acute stress. So we've seen increasing, more overt sanctions and sabotage, political warfare, economic and financial warfare, stress the relationship between the G7 countries and Russia, a critical member of OPEC+. And then you've seen as China has emerged as a major rival to the US, increasing tensions, sort of sub-threshold, and influence in cyber operations, and then a response by the US to de-risk, impose export controls, et cetera. Meanwhile, the relationship between China and OPEC+ countries, and the Gulf in particular, has really flourished. And the establishment of more like technical facilities and financing programs like the Belt and Road Initiative, the Digital Silk Road, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Global Development Initiative, Chinese yuan-denominated swaps, cross-border interbank payment systems from China, the BRICS Bridge, gold oil in Shanghai. These are all sort of geoeconomic developments that have accelerated in the past few years. We've seen an implication of all these changes on the markets, right? The markets aren't just driven by sort of earnings expectations. They're driven by these structural changes: reshoring, realigning, rearming, and rewiring. And now national security and fiscal dominance tend to override market forces. We also face an environment that the incoming administration is trying to address of structural imbalances in the global system, rising debt, and competition, straining relations. As a result, the US, in particular, sovereign bond market, is increasingly fragile and has had to be managed. And so this is the context in which we need to think about US's geoeconomic strength or fragility. The debt market has become fragile as a result of just the sheer scale of the issuance that has started to outpace the ability of the traditional institutions to sort of intermediate that debt issuance. And we've seen examples of this result in acute crises that the Fed has to come in and bail things out. So things look stable, then they break, and then pretty soon you've got trillions of dollars of QE. Another effect of that increasing debt issuance is it's squeezing out critical fiscal space to support our strategic requirements. In particular, we're now paying more on our interest payments than on the defense budget, a thing that the Defense Department is acutely aware of. This is now generating an increasing sense of national security risk. We no longer have the defense industrial base to keep up with the demands of strategic competition. We're aggressively trying to reshore and build out those capabilities, but the timelines to establish those production lines and actually produce the sheer quantity of the munitions to credibly deter China is an acute challenge. Meanwhile, China is continuing to press their strategy forward to dominate global industrial production, climb value chains. And so they've gone from about 6% in 2000, and they're targeted to get roughly half of global industrial production by the end of the decade. Not just an industrial strategy, they're also trying to export their model of digital authoritarianism that's based off of their tech stack and their ideology. This is seen through the distribution of subsea telecommunications cables, but you can also look at maps of exports of Huawei, ZTE, Hikvision, the penetration of Alipay, the now increasing proliferation of really advanced AI models coming out of China. This is a digital competition that has a physical substrate, but is all about dominating and ensnaring the global South and increasingly parts of the West into a geoeconomic and technical network that is ultimately determined and owes allegiance to China and China's model of digital governance. In the monetary sphere, which is the connection to Bitcoin, they have a determined strategy. They recognize they're not going to be able to completely replace the hierarchical correspondent banking network that the US built over many decades after the 50s, but they don't really have to. They can use digital technologies to create more efficient, sort of cross-bridge, central bank to central bank CBDC systems that provide, to first order, a resilience against being sanctioned, because now they can settle most of their trade with their partners in the Middle East and Asia, and they can link increasingly more nodes in the global economic network to them. And they can use systems like mBridge in particular to make themselves more resilient to sanctions and also to build their influence over time. So the BIS incubated this China-backed project. It was quite successful in that pilot stage, and it was only when it was basically already done did the US realize what was happening and then decided to try to kill it, but at that point it was already implemented. And now, of course, Trump has tried to sanction BRICS countries if they attempt to establish a new currency. Now, the Ukraine war marked a phase shift in another key dimension of the structure of the global system, where the Treasury security, which has functioned as a global reserve asset for the past 50 plus years, is increasingly being substituted for gold, especially by central banks, which are accumulating gold on a structural basis for the past 10 years, and that has only accelerated in the past 6 months. Now, where does Bitcoin fit in? US government last week recognized Bitcoin as digital gold for its unique properties. It's scarce, it's liquid, it's decentralized, it's portable, it's fungible, it's verifiable, it's censorship resistant, and it's natively digital. So it has all the aspects of regular gold, but for the 21st century. And we've seen hints, although it's still emerging as a speculative emerging reserve asset, it has responded in many ways as a safe haven in some circumstances, like the 2023 SVB bank failures and the response to the 2022 Ukraine invasion. So it's showing some hints, where it trades as a risk-off asset, some where it trades as a risk-on asset, but as it continues to monetize, these portfolios are thinking about Bitcoin as digital gold. This is translating to changing perceptions by global investors and policymakers about how Bitcoin fits in to their portfolios as major capital managers, but also sovereign funds and national reserves. Larry Fink, just a few months ago, was on stage talking about his conversations with sovereign wealth fund managers. And the conversation wasn't, should we buy Bitcoin or not? It was, what should the allocation be? 2%, 5%? And Larry Fink, who's usually quite cautious with his words, said, if everybody had that conversation, it would be $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 Bitcoin, where it would become, start to rise, meaningfully close to gold. So this is the context in the changing world system that I think we need to think about last Thursday's executive order. That landed on the desk of every major president, central bank, and finance minister in the world. There is now discussions happening, taskers going out through those different bureaucracies about how to interpret that. What does that mean for their own country's relationship to Bitcoin? And governments don't move too fast, but when they do, they move in size, they move in scale, and they can deploy trillions of dollars of capital, and they can have geopolitical effects. And I think we could be at this inflection moment where the geopolitical aspects of Bitcoin start to become extremely important and could shape the next several years of Bitcoin's future. It seems clear that the Bitcoin race is now on, and the ball is in our court to maintain our advantage. Thank you. Now, it's my great pleasure to bring to the stage Congressman Begich, who is here to make a very exciting announcement from Alaska.
I'll tell you, I've followed you on Twitter for years, and it's an honor to follow you today. Well, thank you, everybody. It's an honor to be here today, the Bitcoin for America conference, among so many forward-thinking individuals who understand the critical role Bitcoin will play in the future of our financial system. I want to recognize the important work this institute has done in fostering research, discussion, and policy innovation in the digital space. Today I'm here to make a historic announcement, one that will shape America's economic future for generations to come. Today, I will be introducing the Bitcoin Act of 2025 in the United States House. Now, you know this is a bold and forward-looking legislative initiative designed to ensure the United States secures its financial independence and maintains its leadership in the global digital economy. Before I continue, I want to take a moment and recognize the tireless efforts of my colleague in the Senate, Senator Cynthia Lummis of Wyoming. Senator Lummis has long been a champion of Bitcoin and financial innovation, bringing the Bitcoin discussion to Capitol Hill in ways that have shaped the national conversation on digital assets. Her vision for a strategic Bitcoin reserve as a tool to bolster America's balance sheet and secure our economic future has been instrumental in advancing this discussion. Senator Lummis, I thank you for your leadership and unwavering dedication to securing America's financial future. I'm proud to announce as well, as we introduce this bill, I will have 6 co-sponsors in the United States House as original co-sponsors, and I want to give them a shout out now. Representatives Addison McDowell, Pat Harrigan, Michael Ruley, Troy Nels, Dave Taylor, and Mike Collins, all on board with this bill. So why Bitcoin? People in this room know better than anyone. Bitcoin represents more than just a digital asset. It's a cornerstone of financial sovereignty, economic resilience, and innovation. We're witnessing an unprecedented shift in the global financial landscape. Bitcoin has emerged as the world's first truly decentralized asset, a modern form of digital gold. With a fixed supply of 21 million coins, Bitcoin is not subject to inflationary manipulation, making it one of the most reliable stores of value in human history. Over the past decade, Bitcoin has outperformed every major asset class. In contrast, gold has grown nominally each year. Bitcoin is a strategic asset. It represents financial sovereignty, a hedge against financial instability, and a tool for reinforcing America's global economic strength. Last week, President Donald J. Trump signed an executive order to establish a strategic Bitcoin reserve and a U.S. digital asset stockpile, reinforcing America's leadership in financial innovation. This executive order positions the United States at the forefront of digital revolution and paves the way for the golden age of digital currency in the United States. President Trump understands the growing importance of digital assets in our national sovereignty. This executive order corrects a fundamental issue: previous disjointed management of government-held digital assets, which led to premature sales costing American taxpayers over $17 billion. The Bitcoin Act is the legislative solution to President Trump's vision, solidifying and expanding upon his executive order. By codifying the strategic Bitcoin reserve into law, we ensure that future administrations cannot reverse course on this crucial financial strategy. Mr. President, we are delivering on your promise to make America the global leader in cryptocurrency. The Bitcoin Act establishes a strategic Bitcoin reserve, a federal initiative to ensure the United States holds a significant stake in the world's most important decentralized financial network. This bill recognizes Bitcoin's potential to complement our gold reserves, fortify our national security, and provide economic stability in an increasingly volatile financial world. Our gold reserves stand at approximately 8,133 metric tons, valued at over $750 billion. The United States has long relied on gold as a financial backstop, but it is time to look ahead. By phasing in the acquisition of 1 million Bitcoin, approximately 5% of Bitcoin's total supply over 5 years, we will ensure that America remains a dominant player in the digital financial era. This initiative is designed to be fiscally responsible. Not a single taxpayer dollar will be used. Instead, we will leverage Federal Reserve remittances, which exceeded $76 billion in 2023, gold certificate revaluations, unlocking additional funds to finance Bitcoin purchases, and the Exchange Stabilization Fund, a fund with the mandate to manage currencies outside of the United States dollar. Bitcoin is open, it is censorship resistant, it is immune to geopolitical manipulation, and it embodies the principles of economic freedom, innovation, and self-determination that define America's leadership. I want to be very clear about one thing. The Bitcoin Act does not infringe on private ownership of Bitcoin. It explicitly protects the rights of individuals and businesses to own, hold, and transact Bitcoin freely. It recognizes self-custody as a fundamental right of financial sovereignty. This bill affirms that Americans should never fear government overreach when it comes to Bitcoin. We have built safeguards into the Bitcoin Act to ensure transparency and accountability. A proof of reserve system that will provide public verifiable audits of all government-held Bitcoin. The Comptroller General will oversee all Bitcoin purchases and storage to ensure full transparency, and a 20-year holding period that will prevent politically motivated selling of our reserves, ensuring long-term national security. The Bitcoin Act of 2025 is a commitment to securing America's economic future. It ensures that we will lead the digital financial revolution rather than fall behind. It diversifies our national reserves, strengthens our national balance sheet, and enhances our geopolitical standing, all while affirming the fundamental financial freedoms of every American. As other nations seek alternatives to the U.S. dollar, America must take decisive action to secure our place in the digital future. The Bitcoin Act is that action. I invite my colleagues in Congress to stand with me in enacting this legislation to ensure that the United States remains the global leader in financial innovation and economic security. America was built with bold vision, was built by bold people, and it's time for America to be bold again. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Zach Shapiro. I'm the head of policy at BPI, and I'm going to speak briefly about the state efforts to create Bitcoin reserves. So, across the United States, we're witnessing an unprecedented wave of interest in Bitcoin among state legislatures. In the past year alone, 32 bills have been introduced across 24 states to explore or enact investment in Bitcoin. Of these, 28 have received committee hearings, and 7 have advanced to legislative floors. This state-level momentum has now been matched by federal action. Last week's executive order establishing a strategic Bitcoin reserve marks a watershed moment in U.S. monetary policy. Serious policy discussions have replaced reflexive skepticism, marking a dramatic shift in the Overton window for public investment in Bitcoin. And while the federal government has now taken a bold step forward, states remain crucial laboratories of democracy with an opportunity to pioneer complementary approaches that will work in concert with the federal initiative. Let us be direct about what's happening here. A brand new digital monetary commodity, the first of its kind, is being birthed into existence right before our eyes. This is not just another asset class, it's perhaps a once-in-a-civilization opportunity to redefine what money is and how this tool can best serve humanity. Bitcoin's core appeal is simple but powerful. Absolute, credible digital scarcity. Its fixed supply cap, secured through decentralization, cryptography, and game theory, uniquely positions it as a reliable hedge against monetary debasement. This characteristic, now recognized in an executive order of the President of the United States, makes Bitcoin particularly valuable for state legislatures and for state treasuries. Unlike the federal government, states cannot print money and cannot run perpetual deficits. They must vigilantly protect their reserves' purchasing power against inflation, which inevitably strains budgets, forcing difficult decisions about spending, taxation, and priorities. Over the past decade, Bitcoin has outperformed every traditional asset class, including stocks, bonds, real estate, and precious metals. This performance persisted through multiple market cycles, demonstrating Bitcoin's resilience and growing institutional adoption. For states with long-term obligations like pension plans, pension funds, and infrastructure projects, Bitcoin represents not merely a defensive position against inflation, but a strategic opportunity to grow reserves in real terms. And as you can see from the quotes behind me, drawn directly from this text of the state bills, the suitability of Bitcoin for this purpose has not gone unnoticed. So that's the good news about state-level adoption of Bitcoin. Yet the sobering reality is that the substance of most of these state-level proposals fail to adequately meet the moment. None would trigger Bitcoin purchases upon enactment. Most merely propose feasibility studies or authorize potential future investments. Of the 32 proposals, only 9 specifically mention reserves comprised of Bitcoin as opposed to other cryptocurrencies or asset classes. The efforts to shepherd these bills across the finish lines has also been somewhat lackluster. We've seen promising legislation gutted at the 11th hour, as last week Utah's House Bill 230, which had advanced further than any other of these bills, had its strategic reserve protections stripped out entirely. Too many legislators and Bitcoin boosters are approaching state reserves merely as symbolic gestures as opposed to strategic imperatives. But now is not the time for such timidity. When a state explores holding Bitcoin on behalf of its citizens, it is not chasing the latest trend, it is safeguarding its financial future from forces beyond its control. Given these stakes, states cannot afford half measures. They need thoughtfully crafted laws that enable responsible implementation of Bitcoin reserves, addressing custody solutions, risk management strategies, and clear mandates to maximize long-term value. In the realm of policy, the challenge before us is to move from conceptual support to practical implementation. This requires addressing several critical questions. How should states approach dollar-cost averaging into Bitcoin positions? What custody solutions offer the optimal balance between security and accessibility? What governance structures best insulate Bitcoin reserves from short-term political pressures while maintaining democratic accountability? And what can states do to coordinate their approaches not only with each other, but with the federal strategic Bitcoin reserve to create network effects and shared best practices? In the realm of politics, our greatest challenge isn't merely persuading legislatures to support Bitcoin reserves, but ensuring that they genuinely comprehend Bitcoin's fundamental value as digital monetary infrastructure rather than simply following constituent-pleasing trends. This requires a deep educational effort that transcends partisanship, equipping lawmakers with both the technical understanding and the historical monetary context to seize this unprecedented opportunity to strengthen their state's fiscal sovereignty and position their communities at the forefront of a global revolution that will serve as a financial lifeboat among rising global debt, persistent money printing, and the growing storm of monetary uncertainty and instability. So today, I'm announcing that BPI is developing an open source model legislation framework for state-level Bitcoin reserves to be unveiled at our summit in June. We're creating a comprehensive blueprint that states can adapt to their specific legal and budgetary needs, drawing from Senator Lummis's Bitcoin Act and incorporating the best from the existing state proposals. Our model legislation will detail clear pathways for purchasing Bitcoin, outline rigorous custody protocols, and propose effective oversight measures. Our goal is to transform Bitcoin reserves from theory into practical, secure, and valuable assets for states. But we can't and shouldn't do this alone. We invite all of you here today, policymakers, industry leaders, and informed citizens, to add your voice and shape and then shepherd legislation that is both ambitious and practical. Our collective responsibility is to craft policies that genuinely meet this historic moment, and BPI stands ready as a resource, a partner, and a forum for this essential work. As promising as recent developments at both the state and federal levels are, our work has just begun. We must elevate the standard of legislative drafting, allowing states to adapt Bitcoin reserves effectively, transparently, and prudently. Crucially, we must coordinate these state-level efforts with federal initiatives like the Bitcoin Act, creating an integrated approach to the stewardship of public Bitcoin reserves that will serve generations to come. The window of opportunity before us is historic but not indefinite. Early adopting states will likely capture disproportionate benefits even as the federal government begins building its own reserves. And more importantly, developing robust models for Bitcoin reserve management now will establish precedents that shape public policy for decades. Let us approach this responsibility with the vision and the diligence that it deserves. Thank you. And now it is my absolute privilege to introduce Congressman Ro Khanna, one of the most steadfast supporters of Bitcoin, certainly in the Democratic Party and in the House as a whole, to speak about Bitcoin and U.S. policy.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Let me start by saying what I believe is the obvious. Bitcoin should be bipartisan. The reality is we can't have policy in this country where you have one president does an executive order, another president comes, reverses the executive order, and that there's total uncertainty when it comes to something like Bitcoin. What we need is a consensus that Bitcoin is good as a store of value for the United States and good for the world. I mean, it's just technology. That's what I don't understand about a lot of the hysteria. The basic idea for many is that you don't have, as all of you know, a centralized authority. You don't have people who are gaming the system. You have something that's easy to transport. You have something that's easier to store than gold. I mean, anyone who carries gold in their home would know. Unfortunately, there have been burglaries because there are a lot of Indian American families who still keep gold in my district. But it's easier to store. And that's why a lot of people have chosen to use it as a store of value, not just in the United States, but around the world. And this is one of the things I tell the Democratic Party. We're the party, in the tradition of Kennedy, who believes that we should reach out to the world, that we should make sure that other people around the world have economic empowerment and freedom. Well, if you're in Nigeria, or if you're in parts of India, or you're in other parts of the world, and you have a government that regulates foreign exchange, I know because I used to visit India as a kid when my grandparents were there. I mean, they had very strict controls at the time on getting a dollar. You couldn't just be on the market and get a dollar. But guess what? Now you're going to be able to get Bitcoin. That is transformational for so many people around the world. And that is why the Democratic Party should be embracing this as something that can create financial empowerment for people not just in the United States, but around the world. I am committed I was in Nashville. I'm here. I am committed to working with Senator Loomis, with Senator Gillibrand and others to have a rational policy when it comes to Bitcoin, when it comes to blockchain. And I appreciate all of your advocacy. I'll end with this point. What makes America so incredible, and I say this as representing Silicon Valley, is we've been on the forefront of innovation. We are always thinking about what comes next. And we've been at the forefront of innovation when it comes to finance. And so if we now have new technologies that make it easier to store and transmit value, we should be embracing it as a mark of America's innovation capability. All of you are on the frontiers of that innovation. Thank you for being here. Thank you for what you're doing.
Do you have a clicker? Thanks, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here today to describe how Bitcoin and actually dollar stablecoins can work together to ensure U.S. leadership for decades to come. My journey in crypto started when I was a professor at MIT, and we did the MIT Bitcoin experiment. Now, that was a little bit more than a decade ago. But by now, it's really clear that Bitcoin serves a very special role in the digital asset space. You've heard in the past, it's not about Bitcoin, it's about the blockchain. Here you're looking at the Google Trends volume over more than 10 years since we did that experiment at MIT. And the answer is, it's actually all about Bitcoin. The price when we did the experiment and gave all the MIT undergraduates about a third of a Bitcoin was $350. And at the time of the announcement of the SBR, it was around $90,000. But I don't want that price to distract you from the bigger picture. I love to look at the Bitcoin price on a log scale. When you zoom out and you remove all those daily fluctuations, the craziness of the markets as we're seeing over the last few days, it's a linear trend. It's going up progressively. That's a technology S-curve for you. It's essentially individuals, institutions, and now even governments adopting this new digital asset for the properties that it really entails. But where's the breakthrough? If we were to take a step back, why should you care? Satoshi solved the problem that was outstanding computer science for decades, the double spending problem. Before Bitcoin, we simply didn't know how to create scarce digital asset. Imagine an email attachment, a digital file can be copied many times over. And that's a terrible property when you're trying to think about value and money. By solving that problem, it gave us something truly novel. It entails a reduction in two fundamental economic costs. The first one is the one you heard a lot about today, the cost of verification, the ability to prove ownership, transfer ownership in this scarce, finite digital asset. But today I want to put emphasis on the second one, the cost of networking, which is potentially more important in the long run. It's the ability to bootstrap an economic system, an economic network, without assigning control to any single intermediary. There's no single point of failure in Bitcoin. And that's what makes Bitcoin a lot more important than just digital gold. Digital gold is the starting point, but don't forget sight of Bitcoin, the network. It represents a breakthrough in what economists call market design, how we shape institutions, how we coordinate economic activity all across the globe. Satoshi wrote some code, released it on the internet, and that code came with economic incentives. If you bring security to the network, you will be rewarded. Sometime in the future, maybe 2025. This is where it started. People in their basement, in fact, many of you probably started there, with a big fan and a laptop. But economic forces drove that escalation really rapidly across different production modes and different infrastructure. And over the years, it became more and more professional. Today, of course, Bitcoin mining is state-of-the-art data centers all across the globe looking for stranded energy from renewables to flare gas to whatever is available, hydropower, moments in time where the grid isn't demanding that kind of energy. And they've turned essentially the first infrastructure that's fully available and decentralized on a global scale into something that every one of you can really build on in the future. It is a truly open and decentralized protocol for money. When the internet was first designed, there was an error code, 402, payment required. That got never implemented. And Bitcoin is here to answer that. But you may wonder, why does decentralized infrastructure even matter? Why should you care? Typically, when you think about payments and financial services, you think about digital wallets and their wars, crypto players coming in, legacy networks, the banks, payment service providers. That's kind of the ecosystem. But as we've seen earlier today, often there's also a geopolitical lens on top of it. You can think of payment cold wars. On one side is SWIFT versus CHIPS, or Visa versus UnionPay, Google Pay and Apple Pay against WeChat Pay and Alipay, or Coinbase versus Binance. The decline of US leadership in this space is problematic. We used to be the global leader when it came to banking and financial infrastructure. And Bitcoin is going to be a key component of really rebooting that leadership in the near future. Our adversaries have been trying to undermine the role of the dollar for a long time. We benefit from an exorbitant privilege because we're the issuer of the global reserve currency. Meanwhile, as we heard earlier today, bureaucrats in Basel are designing a version of the financial internet, they call it Finternet, that looks a lot like AOL or Microsoft Network or Apple eWord. There's a good chance you won't remember any of these. In the end, the internet prevailed. The internet was a permissionless open network for information and communication. So there's a better way to build the future financial system. And as you guessed, that starts with Bitcoin. We did this before, and it is also a very American way to build. We did it with the internet. We created the right conditions for the commercial internet to thrive, for innovation and entrepreneurs to build and experiment. That picture is a picture of ARPANET, right, which was a mix of government R&D on the defense side and academic institutions. We have that infrastructure today already in place with Bitcoin and all of you here in this room. We have a narrow window of opportunity. Here you're plotting the global adoption of crypto against the internet to get to 1 billion users. We're at an inflection point, and things will move much more fast from here onwards. The good news is that despite the attacks on the industry from the last few years, most of the talent is still here. So we have the capability to build, and we can really seize this opportunity. We can still prevent a crypto Sputnik surprise. We've seen it in AI, and of course in crypto, we have a chance to lead. How do we do that? We need to really harness the power of open and permissionless networks. We need to build. We need to make them the backbone of our payments and financial infrastructure. So you have often thought of Bitcoin, the asset. I would love for you to think about Bitcoin, the network. Now, many of you will raise eyebrows, right? So Bitcoin is hard to build on. Bitcoin is like building for space. It's extremely complex. It's simple by design. It doesn't have the flexibility of other permissionless networks, but that's also its strength. TCP/IP was the protocol for information exchange. Bitcoin will be the TCP/IP of value. And the US can lead in building out that infrastructure so that the future financial ecosystem is based here. You may ask, how does this interplay with the dollar? The dollar and Bitcoin are complements, as we already heard earlier today. And in fact, by designing a strategic platform play around both the role of Bitcoin, the network, and the asset, and USD-denominated stablecoins, we can really increase the chances of the United States leading in this industry for decades to come. Stablecoins can be the killer app on top of a network that is open, decentralized, can reach where the dollar cannot, and can really complement US values and principle anywhere in the world. Thank you very much.
Next up, we have a panel that I am really excited for, Bitcoin, AI, and Energy Dominance, moderated by BPI Senior Fellow Troy Cross, with 3 of the titans of the US Bitcoin mining industry, Zach Bradford, Fred Thiel, and Jason Less. Welcome, everyone.
Hi, everybody. I have to take just a moment to soak this in. It's, as somebody who was mining in 2011 in my basement, I come from the basement dwelling era of Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining, and it's surreal. The events of the past few days and the events of today, the announcements we heard this just now, legislation on a strategic Bitcoin reserve being advanced in both House and the Senate. Also, it's amazing for me to see the activity of mining professionalized and finding its way in the world. I thought I would start by just, for a moment, reflecting on the reason why we're talking about mining at an event about a strategic Bitcoin reserve. And I think it's worth reviewing the principles that made that possible. Bitcoin is fair and open and transparent because all of it is issued through a competitive process anybody can participate in. You don't have to get Bitcoin from somebody who owns it or somebody who printed it for themselves. Nobody printed any of it for themselves. You can get it from nature. And in order to transaction in Bitcoin, you don't have to pay somebody who owns some Bitcoin to cross their land. You can, you pay a miner. And those miners, well, these maybe hold some Bitcoin, but they don't have to hold Bitcoin. And that's what makes that's what makes Bitcoin gold-like and have the kind of qualities that make it eligible for a reserve instrument. So I wanted to review that first of all. That's kind of looking back at the past and why we're here. But this panel is about it's about the future. As far as we've come with Bitcoin and mining, we're going much farther than we've come. And we're at an inflection point right now, and I want to get insights from these three who collectively represent, I don't know, something like 13% of the hash rate, global hash rate in Bitcoin, all American companies, to help us reflect on it. Bitcoin mining tethers the ledger of Bitcoin to the physical world, and that means it has real effects, real physical and economic effects in the world beyond what happens on the ledger. And those are not easy to foresee. I did not foresee them in 2011, not at all. I didn't see this. But the people who are working closest to it do see it happening. I wanted to start with you, Jason. Well, the title of our session is American Energy Dominance, Bitcoin AI and American Energy Dominance. How does Bitcoin promote energy dominance? We use a lot of energy, something like 0.7% of the electricity in the world. How does that help our quest for energy dominance rather than hurt it by using a scarce resource?
Well, to set the stage here first, we want the United States to be a leader, the leader, I should say, in Bitcoin and AI. We need energy to do that. Efficiency gains notwithstanding, compute and therefore power to drive that compute is a critical input to building successful models, having sufficient amount of inference. Energy is necessary to be leaders in AI. The companies that have the most amount of training are driving out the best models. Now we need power to do that. Where does that power come from? You can build generation. You build generation where that fuel source or other type of natural input exists, but that is not always where the consumer of that energy is. You need to build transmission after that. I'm laying out a multi-year timeline it takes to build generation and then be able to transmit that to an off-taker. That introduces risk, uncertainty, complexity, and cost for generation, energy generation. Bitcoin miners solve those problems. Bitcoin miners will take that energy immediately at the point of commissioning that plant wherever it exists. You can build transmission over time, and by being that offtake, that energy buyer of last resort, or in this case, first resort, you are helping bring more energy into the United States. And in turn, that energy can then eventually be repurposed and used for AI HPC data centers. This isn't a theory. This is something that is happening today. Riot, we have built an energy portfolio of 1.7 gigawatts of power. The purpose of that was for Bitcoin mining. Now, as markets evolve and other uses for that power emerge, what was previously stranded energy is now very highly valuable energy that data center developers and AI HPC companies are interested in using for driving their purposes. So we're seeing this dynamic happen already. And by having these flexible loads like Bitcoin miners that will come in there and take energy wherever it is available, we are driving more energy infrastructure in the form of generation, in the form of transmission, and that is how the United States achieves energy dominance.
Thanks, Jason. I wanted to turn it to you, Fred. You've talked about there being islands of power, like as if we're on this vast sea and we have stranded bits of power generation. How does Bitcoin address that? How are you addressing it at Marathon?
So Bitcoin is the ultimate dispatchable load. Power generators want base load consumption. Why do they want base load? Because they then don't have to regulate their production of energy to meet the base load. And Bitcoin mining can shut down their facilities, their operations in minutes, and then ramp them back up, all driven by signals from the power grid. Islands of power are essentially stranded islands of energy generation. In the US, especially in places like West Texas, there was a huge overbuild of renewable energy that is basically wind and solar. It's intermittent. And the problem, as Jason pointed out, is there's a lack of transmission to get that to consumers. And there's so much power abundance, energy abundance in the middle of the day that at times you have negative pricing of energy. And so there are electrons being wasted every single day. Those are islands of power. And Marathon is one of the first miners that actually bought a wind farm in West Texas so that we can consume that energy whenever an electron is being produced, so no electron is wasted. Duke University just published a study a few weeks ago, essentially stating that the US power grid today has additional capacity of about 70 plus gigawatts of power, more than enough for the 48 gigawatts of power the AI industry needs, if only they can dispatch the load 5% of the time. Think about that. We have enough power to power all of the AI that we have projected to build over the next few years, if only we can dispatch the load. And that's not something AI typically does today. But Bitcoin miners do that extremely well. And so in the meantime, while we're building out the infrastructure for AI, and while we're building out the transmission, these very expensive data centers that take many years to build, Bitcoin miners can consume those islands of power that are lost and that are not being utilized. And this is not just in the US, but Bitcoin miners can go and do this internationally. And if US Bitcoin miners go internationally, that is also global hash rate that will still belong to the US and its allies. If you read between the lines as to what members of the executive branch are very focused on doing, which is the US acquiring sufficient global hash rate such that it can project power with global hash rate, it's the US and its allies, while American companies going abroad effectively are bringing that hash rate home. So not only are we looking to export dollars via digital currencies, stable coins, we're also looking to project power with Bitcoin and with global hash rate, and I believe that there are tons of islands of power that we can take advantage of all over the world, across the US and other places.
Thanks, Fred. Zach, in the recent months, quarters, so many Bitcoin mining companies have pivoted to HPC and AI. As the hype around AI has built tremendous interest, and there's a need for power. There's a lot of panic about whether we'll have enough power to supply them. You've made a case for a pure play in Bitcoin mining, and I wondered if you could tell us what your thinking is there and how you managed to do it, because the hype is Bitcoin mining cannot compete with AI because it doesn't pay as much.
Yeah, we still continue to think that Bitcoin mining is the greatest way to use power. But it's been a big focus on where we're going. So we actually have 31 data centers spread across the US of various sizes, some very large and some very small. But to Fred's point about pockets of power, we're spread across 4 states. And when you think of a data center for CleanSpark that mines Bitcoin, generally you should think about the city that used to be thriving. It used to have a sawmill. It used to have industry. And then the freeways came 40, 50 years ago, and they went around this town. And 20 years after that, the industry left. And so there are places very well developed. I'll use Tennessee and Georgia as the example, where great power infrastructure, it's been aged, it's been forgotten about. We've come into those cities, we've helped revitalize that infrastructure, improve it, make it more resilient. And then we work in these communities. These are communities also that come with their doors wide open and they're welcoming because they've had deficits for decades. You know, one example being a mayor in one of the cities, 44 years the city's had a deficit, and he's been involved in the city council and the mayor ever since. And for the first time for the last 2 years, they have a surplus, and they're now applying that to local property taxes. And so in those areas, we're also seeing low-cost power. And so it's about being strategic. The U.S. grid has lots of problems. That's actually where we as CleanSpark got into the business, is we were in the energy space first. We were working with microgrids and the macro grid in many ways. But the amount of wasted energy that is produced and not consumed in this country is immense. And you know, we approach it with a think large mindset. We use the same concepts as very large data center operators use with central operating parameters that allow us to, again, we're a decentralized network. We didn't decentralize our locations while centralizing operations. So again, we think that Bitcoin mining, and you know, at CleanSpark as America's Bitcoin miner, we think that there's no better place to do it from here. And there's plenty of opportunity to make that happen right here at home.
I think Bitcoin mining remains the most misunderstood industry in the world. It's hard to understand, I think, for most people how something that uses a lot of power can help us build out power infrastructure, can help us pave the way for other forms of compute and power usage, bring money to communities that didn't have it, bring jobs to communities that didn't have it. But you guys are doing all of that, and you see it firsthand. What are the challenges you faced? I've heard you say, Fred, we had headwinds, now we have a tailwind in a regulatory way. You know, Donald Trump has said he wants all the Bitcoin to be mined in America. I think we can all agree that would be contrary to the security of Bitcoin. But nevertheless, it's fresh and encouraging to hear. What holds you back? What holds you back right now? What's like the one thing, I guess, for each of you that you'd like to see change so that you could, you know, advance the energy dominance of America more easily?
Thank you. I think one of the key issues is there still remain issues with power utilities and pejorative pricing towards Bitcoin miners. I think there's a perspective from certain power utilities that they don't want to have Bitcoin miners on their grids because they don't actually understand the benefits that Bitcoin miners bring to their grids and their systems. And this is just something that's a question of education and spending time talking to people. You know, when you have 4 or 5 years of members of the executive branch and at the state level all saying, you know, Bitcoin mining is a Ponzi scheme, Bitcoin miners are criminals, you know, it's hard to erase that, right? It's very easy to create a perception. It's very hard to change a perception. You know, Regis McKenna, the famous marketing guru, was famous for saying that. And it's going to take time. But, you know, when you see the success we've had in Texas, you know, go back 4 years ago. We were burning up the planet, right? Remember, we were going to have more, we're going to consume more energy than this planet had, and Bitcoin mining was going to create fossil fuel emissions that were going to be crazy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, Texas is a success story. North Dakota is a success story. Nebraska is doing really well. Ohio is starting to do really well. A lot of states where Zach and are operating, same thing. You know, these communities, these small power pockets, even these bigger grids are now learning that Bitcoin mining is actually really good. And in Nebraska, where a state senator was trying to add pejorative taxation to Bitcoin miners, the power utilities stood up and defended the Bitcoin miners and said, hey, no, we like these guys. These are good customers. So I think that's, for me, is the biggest issue.
Yeah, you know, I think I'll add on that. Just again, I think that there's the misinformation, whether it's environmental, whether it's at the utility side, whether it's the community impact. You know, there's misinformation. I think there's fear-based approaches that it adds cost to the local communities when Bitcoin miners come into town. The reality is we're incredibly well positioned to not only create a very strong tax base without a lot of resources leaving the community, but also, you know, from a power pricing point of view, because we are buying power that otherwise someone has to pay for. Well, all that wasted power that goes in the ground, tariffs are built to basically account for that. And it could be 30%, for example, of what a local residential tax or citizen may have to pay into it because they have to pay for what's lost. When we come in and we take that very same power, it allows them to reset tariffs on, you know, whatever basis that regulatory environment has, and actually shift those costs away from standard residential users. So I think we need more information. We need more case studies to help support this, because there's a lot of evidence there, and we just need to continue to spread the word.
I'll be brief. We need energy regulators to not be adverse to behind-the-meter co-located loads. You know, power should be sold to who can take it and to who the generator wants to sell it to. This is a part of driving more generation.
That's great, and yeah, that fits with research that Margot Paez and I have done. Our biggest suggestion is just like, Bitcoin miners are amazing if you give them the right price signals. They will turn off in times of scarcity, and they will run in times of abundance. And when I talk to people about power, I mention Bitcoin's power usage. I have one slogan, which is Bitcoin mining doesn't just use a lot of power, but it pays for a lot of power, and that flips something. And also, it doesn't just use a lot of power, it uses power flexibly and only the cheapest power in the world. And if you just ask yourself the question, would it be really bad to have something use 1% of the world's electricity if it only used the cheapest 1% at the times it was cheapest anywhere in the world? You get people thinking. All right, thanks everybody, and thanks to this panel.
All right, let's hear it again for the mining CEOs. Thank you guys for joining us. Really excited for our next panel. We're going to get it started immediately here. I'd like to introduce Nick Newman, CEO of CASA, Nathan McCauley, CEO of Anchorage Digital, and Mike Belshey, CEO of BitGo. Give it up. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks, everybody. So we're going to talk about safeguarding America's Bitcoin today, which I think is a very interesting and timely topic with everything else that we've been talking about and with some of the things that have been happening overall in the security news around the crypto industry in the last few weeks. So we'll start with maybe a quick set of intros. I'm Nick, CEO of CASA. We're one of the biggest Bitcoin self-custody companies in the world.
My name is Mike Belshey. I'm founder and CEO of BitGo. We've been operating since 2013. We have a full complement of both self-custody and custody services here in America and 7 trust companies around the planet.
Hi there. My name is Nathan McCauley, co-founder and CEO of Anchorage Digital.
Mike's off, Nathan.
Testing?
Yeah.
Hi there. My name is Nathan McCauley. I'm co-founder and CEO of Anchorage Digital. We're a digital asset custodian, trading partner, and we're the first and only federally chartered bank overseen by the U.S. Treasury here in the United States.
Awesome. So we now have a Bitcoin strategic reserve and a digital asset stockpile. What are the unique considerations that we have around securing nation-state level crypto assets compared to your kind of typical institutional or individual custody?
Sure. Well, security is something you're just never done with. I did a talk, I think probably 3 or 4 years ago, about securing the $1 trillion wallet. And it's kind of a jest. You don't put $1 trillion in a single wallet. That would not be a very smart thing to do. But as the value of the asset keeps going up, of course, the types of attackers and the threats
continues to go up. So you just don't finish, right? And as we look to the next level, of course we have to be thinking about how do we use multiple keys, how do we separate those, how do we make sure that we have understanding and control of all of the paths to it. There's a lot of technical people here. We could probably talk about it at some more depth, but obviously as now we're at the nation state level, we have to be going to the next level of security.
Yeah, I'd say just the number of issues that have happened around the security of private keys, the security of wallets, the security of Bitcoin holdings. It's almost a meme in the industry about how much problems like this happen. Agree with Mike. The point with digital asset security is there's not one answer. There's infinite number of things you have to get right, a never-ending set of things you have to get right. So this is not just about technical solutions. It's about making sure that an organization and a muscle is built that stays up to date on the latest trends. The way I think about it is you have the comparison in the EO to Fort Knox. Fort Knox works because it turns out the U.S. government is actually quite good at violence when necessary, and so can utilize its violence mechanism in order to protect the gold at Fort Knox. Within the cyber realm, we don't necessarily have that advantage. We have to kind of stay up to date on the latest there. And I think this is why Michael Saylor's comments earlier were so important. In order for us to be the leader in the digital realm with digital asset security, we have to also be the leader in the cybersecurity realm. And so as we think about how to secure the SBR at a nation-state level, we have to assume that there are nation-state level attackers that will come after that. And actually, it needs to be a true investment of resources, time, and attention.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing we definitely cannot afford to have is the headline, North Korea hacks the US Bitcoin. And that's not an unreasonable headline to see, especially after, I mean, this was the headline for Bybit 2 weeks ago. And I think that's something that, as a nation, historically, we've been very fortunate that we have the world's strongest military. We have all this, the oceans on two sides of a giant landmass, right? And all of that is much less relevant in cyberspace, where a very small country like North Korea could potentially have a very large effect on the U.S.'s image.
Well, they get turned off? Oh, there we are. I mean, the Bybit hack gets a lot of noise, right? And 1.5 billion is a lot of money. Look, super simple fix for that, don't put more than $100 million in a single wallet, right? Would have fixed that particular instance. And that's not even getting into some of the failures that they had around, you know, not getting security delegation down so that like they can modify the smart contract. Okay, so they made a bunch of silly mistakes. We absolutely know how to secure this stuff right now, and we can keep it safe from nation states. For Bitcoin in particular, it's got one of the safest models. We've got multi-sig, it's on-chain. We know how to secure these keys. On behalf of the government, we know how to secure these keys. And we can do that in a setup, you know, you're an expert on 3 of 5. That's what I think primarily what you guys do, right? We do mostly 2 out of 3, but you can also, you know, devise other setups that could be more specific. Again, as the size of the reserve gets larger, we will want to keep revisiting this, but definitely using a combination of physical security along with virtual security. We know how to do this today.
Should the government hold its own keys?
Yes.
I think if the government wants to make that investment, that would be a totally appropriate thing to do. I would dare say it'd even be cool if the government went to the level of designing a self-custody system, implementing that. I think it's worth understanding what that investment would look like. I think that's probably dozens of people permanently who will help manage and oversee a setup like that. And so I think a prudent answer would be to start with using custodians. And then if there is continued growth, we come up with budget neutral ways to maybe acquire even more Bitcoin as the stockpile grows, as the reserve grows, as a true investment. That might make sense. But I think the prudent option would be to start with the custodial partners.
They invited me to insert my opinion as moderator, and so I think I want to disagree slightly with that last point, which is that last Wednesday we had the government owned some Bitcoin, owned some crypto, and it was, you know, it's maybe sitting in a closet at the U.S. Marshal's office or something like that.
On a ledger drive in somebody's desk.
Yeah, yeah, it's in somebody's desk right now. But then, as of Thursday, the Bitcoin became a strategic asset for the country, and so I think you can actually think about the strategic Bitcoin reserve and the crypto stockpile differently. And as a strategic asset for the country, I think the U.S. has to be really putting the effort into securing this asset, just like we put in the effort to secure our gold. And then the crypto stockpile, which maybe we're selling, maybe who knows what we're going to do with it, but that we have a lot more freedom with what we can do with that. That makes sense to have it a custodian. It's less of a strategic asset for the country. But when we think about owning cyberspace, just like we own our land space and just like we own our airspace, the U.S. really needs, I think, that level of control that comes from holding their own keys.
Well, look, you know, also we're interested in figuring out how to future-proof this reserve, right? I mean, I think there's a big political discussion to be had. It's outside of this room, but you know, we could time lock those coins for a very long time. You know, obviously at some point you want to have access to it, and you want to have access to it when you need it. What those events might be, it's unclear. But you could start with the small amount, because it's small today, right? And they could lock it up for an extended period of time to kind of get through this period of instability as the reserve gets established. And then you can get into a rotating set of time locks, which could actually all be audited and monitored online. We could all see it all the time. But yeah, I do think it's really important for the government to hold the keys directly. Like, it would just be any type of failure with a third party on it, I think would be a mistake. And of course, there's lots of software that you can use to employ along the way, including, you know, the software that's been used by custodians like BitGo for like forever. So there's a lot of good starting points, but they should hold the keys.
Yeah, I think to me the significance of this strategic Bitcoin reserve is, on one hand, it's about the strategic Bitcoin reserve and the vote of confidence that's being put in Bitcoin as an asset class. I think at a more pragmatic level, the natural second and third order implications of having a strategic Bitcoin reserve become pretty profound. To talk about a few things like that, I think probably we're going to end up in a world where people are able to pay their taxes in Bitcoin or other digital assets. People are able to maybe pay for their DMV licensure with stablecoins. And so the U.S. Treasury, as the tastemaker for what the rest of the federal government uses in terms of banking partners, in terms of infrastructure partners, will play a key role in deciding exactly how this is going to play out. And so I think the question on how the strategic reserve is held is not just a question of where are we going to hold the Bitcoin, where are we going to hold the other coins that are in there, but really what is the all of government strategy for embracing digital assets. I think thinking of it in that light, it starts to make sense to think about real service providers that can help. Certainly, we don't want every single agency within the federal government building their own self-custody systems to facilitate tax collection or other kinds of services that the federal government has. And so I think this really is the starting point for what ends up being an all of government effort. And I think keeping that in mind as designing the systems and processes that go into here is really the framing that I think probably Treasury is going to take with thinking through this issue.
So thinking about just kind of the stockpile and the reserve, can we just talk through at a high level for maybe the non-custody experts, what are the layers of loss and threat vectors that we need to be thinking about protecting against with this type of asset? And how is that different than a physical asset, or even just how some of the other digital systems that we use work today? Like what are kind of those different levels of things that we need to be thinking about protection for?
Well, it starts at key generation. So the first thing that has to happen is you're going to put it into some set of wallets. The fidelity of that key generation has to be done under very secure, controlled circumstances. Usually it's videotaped along with that, special computers, all the regular things you would think. Because if the key is compromised right off the bat, then of course the money can disappear later. Or if it's brute forceable later because you did something insecure, That's a problem. So the initial security, technology, processes around it are actually pretty deep, no matter what. Of course, you got some construct that you use. It's probably a multi-sig based thing for a Bitcoin type reserve. You've got where are those keys going to be physically held. In the case of what we do, we hold 3 keys. All of them are always 1,000 miles apart from each other. Some of the things you have to protect against on each of those is like, well, who has access to it, right? So even inside the government, somebody's going to have access. You need to use some sort of an M of N system because you want to make sure that in case something bad happens, losing one key doesn't jeopardize losing the entire thing. The personnel that are involved there, how do you avoid any insider problems there? You've got physical safety issues in terms of digital storage, in terms of networking access, et cetera. You've got protocols that have to be built for how you coordinate a quorum of signing in order to enact a transaction. Pretty much every single aspect from physical security, digital security has to be thought of. And then, of course, you're probably keeping it cold, which means you've got to figure out how are you doing your online to offline transitions.
Nathan, anything to add there?
No, like I said earlier, there's 1,000 things to get right. There's not one.
And it only takes one thing to get wrong.
Yeah, exactly right. That's what we see with almost every one of the attacks that we've seen over the last, say, 15 years in crypto has been one thing that was wrong, and that leads to, unfortunately, can be pretty devastating loss. So separation of concerns, personnel considerations, key generation, key usage, all of these factor in. I'd say another one to be thinking about is audit. How do we make sure that we still have the Bitcoin that we thought we had? How do we make sure that it's still there and able to be audited and overseen? One of the things in the executive order called out the fact that we, at this point, really don't even know how much digital assets are owned by the U.S. government. So being able to have an ongoing accounting there of what that position is, where those assets are, is another, I think, key consideration as thinking about how to secure the reserve.
Yeah, how important is, and we have a minute left here, how important is the transparency aspect of this? And how far do we, as a country, want to go with this for our country's Bitcoin? If you look at the El Salvador model, they've got a page that says exactly how much Bitcoin they have at all times. Do we want to go to that length or something, more manual or even not? Today, it's not even audited at all.
I'd assume that it will look something like the transparency that comes out of the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve publishes their balance sheet on a regular basis. And so this kind of understanding of, hey, what's backing the dollar? What are the strategic reserves there? Where we have transparency on how much oil is owned by the U.S., the other kinds of strategic reserves we have. So I imagine that the transparency here would be in line with that, perhaps even more, because we'll have blockchain-based transparency as well. We'll be able to see the addresses on chain and be able to paint those wallets and know, hey, this is the wallet that is owned by the American people.
Yep. Okay. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Thank you both for your time.
Thank you.
All right, thank you again, gentlemen. We really appreciate you being with us today. Up next, we have a presentation, Getting the Best Deals on America's Bitcoin Buys. Join me in welcoming David Lawant, CEO of Falcon X.
These are tough acts to follow. This is a great event. I'm very excited to be here. So hello, everyone. My name is David Lawant. I'm head of research at FalconX. FalconX is one of the leading prime brokers and liquidity providers in the crypto space. Basically, I want to address a question that might be in the backs of many people's minds here, which is, how do you buy 1 million Bitcoin? Or how do you buy such a large amount of Bitcoin? Is that even possible? What are the venues that are allowed for this? And allow me to spend a little bit of time drawing the liquidity profile of Bitcoin and talking a little bit how this market has been set up, especially the more, let's say, liquidity venue profiles. At FalconX, we buy, but sometimes sell Bitcoin at very large quantities for a number of very different institutions. We do this for ETF issuers, we do this for Bitcoin miners, We do this for hedge funds, venture funds, retail platforms, and many others. And my job as a research analyst, I spend a ton of time looking into these liquidity trends and market structure. So I think we're in good shape to start thinking about these liquidity profiles. And why is it important to think about trading execution in the context of the Bitcoin strategic reserve? And I think for those who don't know this in the room, I hate to break it to you, but you're not going to buy 1 million Bitcoin for $80,000 each. The moment you start buying Bitcoin, or probably the moment you announce your intention to buy Bitcoin at this scale, the market will start moving against you. So depending on how good this execution is, the amazing numbers that we saw at Saylor's presentation earlier today, they can look relatively different. So that's what I'm about to discuss here and try to introduce the concept. I don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to go very quickly here. And don't get me wrong, the Bitcoin market is a very liquid market. So if you look at Bitcoin just on the spot market, just like spot Bitcoin, ready Bitcoin, no futures, no ETFs, just Bitcoin trading on exchanges. We're talking about a market that moves $20 to $25 billion a day. So Bitcoin is a very liquid asset. The Bitcoin markets and the spot markets are also relatively deep, but considering the size of a strategic reserve, just to put this into context, if we look only at the spot markets in isolation, it takes about 1,000 Bitcoin, which is about $80 million right now, to move the price up or down by 1%. And 1,000 Bitcoin or $80 million is a lot of money, at least for me, maybe not for everyone in this room, but it's a lot of Bitcoin. But in the context of the strategic reserve, it might not be. So still, there are firms like us and many others that trade Bitcoin at very large quantities on a regular basis, on a daily basis. And here I have two pieces of good news. The first one is that the Bitcoin market structure has evolved significantly over the past few years, that it goes well beyond the spot market that most of us are already used to. There's ETFs, but there's also OTC desks. These are over-the-counter desks that trade Bitcoin bilaterally on very, very large quantities. That's where most of the institutional flow goes through. Today, we have a very well-developed derivatives market. So if you look at the Bitcoin futures market, it's actually a multiple times bigger than the spot market, 3 to 5 times. It trades tens of billions, sometimes $100 billion plus. There's an emerging options market, especially over the past 12 to 24 months, that has been gaining a lot of traction. And options are interesting because it allows you to express some very unique views in the market. So that's the first piece of good news that I have. The second is that American firms are really good at sourcing liquidity at scale. This is something that American firms have started, and it's something that these firms have been dominating for the past many years. Some of these firms are here. And this is interesting because it happens even though most of the liquidity sits outside of the US. If you look at these spot markets, something like 80 to 85% of the Bitcoin liquidity stands offshore. In the futures market, this number is even bigger. But still, you have these incredible American firms that are really good at sourcing liquidity at scale with minimal impact to the market. So basically, there's a lot more to talk. We're just scratching the surface here. But basically, my recommendation is to not leave trade execution as an afterthought. Bring this as an important consideration as early as possible in the process. The earlier you do that, the more options you have to try to find ways to anticipate the market going against you. So I'm basically running out of time. I'm more than happy to discuss liquidity trends. I have probably more data than you would ever like to see about it. But for those who want to discuss it, I'm around. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. For our next keynote, I'm excited to introduce, I'll tell you the title of it first, Bit Bonds, an idea whose time has come. Welcome me and joining us, Andrew Hones of New Market Capital.
Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here. My name is Andrew Hones. I'm the founder of New Market. We're a registered investment advisor specializing in structured credit. We've completed about $50 billion worth of notional risk transfer over the last several years with many of the world's largest banks. As respects Bitcoin, I'm also thrilled to have been the founder of Battery Finance in partnership with 1031, the largest Bitcoin-only venture firm in the world, and I'm also delighted to serve on the board of Fold. You may have seen recently we announced the completion of our first transaction blending Bitcoin with a traditionally financeable asset, which was a commercial real estate loan that we completed in Philadelphia and announced on CNBC some time ago. We have a deep pipeline of those types of investments, and we're actively working with pensions across the United States to assist them in, let's say, safeguarding their credit investments from the ravages of inflation. Today, however, I'm going to share a thought experiment related to the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve and the United States Treasury. In particular, we're going to talk about bit bonds, and our goal today is to think about how could we lower 10-year interest rates, build savings for American families, and at the same time defease the national debt. These are three pretty big objectives, but I think that they're remarkably achievable when you begin to perceive the compound annual growth rates of Bitcoin. And in many ways, Michael's talk earlier today set the stage for this in a beautiful way. First of all, we have $9.3 trillion of federal debt that's coming due within the next 12 months. The interest rates on that debt have dramatically increased over the last 3 years, and refinancing it at today's interest rates will create an extremely profound burden on taxpayers. Secretary Bessent has indicated his strong desire to spread future Treasury issuances across the duration curve, avoiding the risk of putting everything in the short end of the curve, as Secretary Yellen did. President Trump and Secretary Bessent have also indicated their strong interest in lowering 10-year interest rates, which have an important effect on consumer finance, mortgage finance, auto loans, as well as the federal interest expense. President Trump created the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve, and in particular directed the United States government to identify revenue-neutral ways to acquire Bitcoin. By creatively integrating Bitcoin into Treasury bonds, I would like to suggest that we can significantly reduce the borrowing costs of the federal government and defease the debt. And in particular, I would like to propose that for Americans that purchase these bonds, that they be tax-free from both interest as well as capital gains and offer a very strong way for American families to rebuild wealth. So what's the program? It's actually pretty straightforward. $2 trillion bond issuance, 10% of the bonds go for the purchase of Bitcoin, 90% go for other government purchases. Per $100, $10 buys Bitcoin. The interest rate on a current pay basis is much lower than the normal interest rate, only 1% per year. This dramatically reduces the current interest expense of the federal government. At the conclusion of the bond, in this case a 10-year bond, investors are due a compound annual growth rate of 4.5% on a senior basis. That's equivalent, roughly, to the 10-year interest rate on treasuries today. And after they receive 4.5% on a senior basis, they're entitled to 50% of the Bitcoin upside, and the United States government retains the other 50% of the Bitcoin upside. What would this look like? Well, if it's a $2 trillion issuance right off the bat, that would mean $200 billion worth of Bitcoin purchased. At $90,000 per Bitcoin, that's 2.22 million Bitcoin. Of course, the price will fluctuate and likely will acquire a different amount than that, but that's at $90,000. What would this look like in terms of savings? Well, the current U.S. 10-year rate is roughly 4.5%. And the proposed rate for the bit bond is 1%, which is a 3.5% annual savings, or $70 billion on $2 trillion of total issuance. Over 10 years, that's $700 billion. On a present value basis, roughly $554 billion. If you consider the cost of acquiring the Bitcoin, which is $200 billion, that produces a net taxpayer savings on interest presently of $354 billion. In other words, the United States federal government could acquire $200 billion of Bitcoin and save $354 billion at the same time. Of course, this is just an illustration, but I think that it would be great if American families could also purchase these bonds in addition to institutional and foreign investors like Tether. We learned today that they have enormous holdings in United States treasuries. And institutional and foreign investors will be attracted to these bonds because they can serve as eligible collateral for a range of different swap and derivative arrangements. But for American families, I would like to propose that the BIT bonds be free of income tax and free of capital gains tax in order to put a tremendous tool for savings in the hands of everyday Americans. What would this look like? What could an American family expect to gain over the course of 10 years? Well, there are 138 million American families, and if they purchased 20% of this total issuance, that would be a $2,900 investment per family. What I've illustrated on the right are the 4-year compound annual growth rates for Bitcoin at the 10th, 25th, 50th, 75th, and 90th percentile. And as you can see, at even the 10th percentile, the interest plus the Bitcoin upside on this bond would be $96.58 for a compound annual growth rate of just shy of 7%. And that's on a tax-free basis, a tax-exempt basis. At the 25th percentile, you're looking at 9.33%, and at the 50th percentile, you're looking at a tremendous return over a 10-year period, 17%. What would this look like for the government, for the United States of America? We would dramatically reduce 10-year interest rates. We've already discussed that. Significant savings, $554 billion present value savings. Substantially reduce dramatically reduce the interest rates from 4.5% to 1%. That can ripple through the rest of the Treasury market and reduce mortgage borrowing, reduce auto borrowing, reduce small business lending costs, so many different advantages. Also substantially reduce the interest expense for the government. That's where the present value component comes in. Revenue neutral acquisition of an enormous amount of Bitcoin. And if you take a look at the CAGRs, and we have a symbolic one in there that I want to draw your attention to. But if you take a look at the 25th percentile compound annual growth rate, 37% per year, which, by the way, is exactly equal to Michael's bull case for Bitcoin in the year 2045 on a CAGR basis, that produces a government upside in this structure, and I did not plan it this way, it just turned out this way. That produces a government upside in the structure of 1776. 1.776 trillion US dollars. That's after 10 years. As you extend this out to 20 years, in the year 2045, the compound annual growth rate of the 25th percentile, 36.62%, produces a government entitlement of Bitcoin that is slightly greater than $50.8 trillion, which is the expected size of the funded federal debt in the year 2045. In other words, with this plan, we're in a position to defease the federal debt. In summary, BIT bonds are a win-win-win. We're looking at dramatically lower interest rates in the form of savings, $554 billion of present value savings. The upside that the government stands to generate is enormous, anywhere between $830 billion to over $300 trillion of upside from the 10th to 90th percentile of historic Bitcoin performance. The debt offset is significant at just the 25th percentile of performance. This is a plan that can defease the entire debt. The family wealth creation is remarkably powerful. This puts in the hands of everyday American families a tremendous tool to defend against inflation. And in summary, I would love to see this adopted by the Treasury and by Congress. So I thank you all for your time today, and I'm very grateful to Grant and David and Matt for putting on such a tremendous conference. Thank you all.
Fantastic. Thank you, Andrew. And before anyone else steals it, you want to go ahead and copyright the title of your next book, 1776, A Bitcoin Story. Next up, next presentation is Gold is Beautiful, Bitcoin is Smart. And, my wife is both, and honey, you'll see you on the live stream. Excited to introduce Pierre Richard, co-founder of the Satoshi Nakamoto Institute. Join me in welcoming him.
Thank you. What a tremendous honor to share the stage with senators and representatives of the greatest country on earth. I myself am an immigrant from France, or a refugee perhaps, and a naturalized citizen. So this means a lot to me. And I also, I've been researching Bitcoin for the better part of a decade now, and never in my wildest dreams would I have imagined being up on this stage. So I have the challenge of following Andrew's very eloquent presentation, so I'll do my best here. So, fundamentally, when we look at gold, people point out that gold is an investment, but also that it has a tremendous amount of utility. And I agree with them on the latter, and that's, I think, what we should focus on with regards to gold. From the Wall Street Journal, they pointed out that this recent rise in the price of gold is actually hurting U.S. manufacturers. And, we've got jewelry that is getting diluted to fewer and fewer carats. We've got, it's getting hollowed out. Dentists, my father-in-law is a dentist. He points out that gold is the best to use for caps and whatnot from a medical perspective, but it's just so expensive. And so I humbly suggest that it would be a really great idea to put all of that gold in Fort Knox that is collecting dust and put it to productive use in the American economy. And in particular, next year, we have the 250th anniversary of this great nation, 1776. Wouldn't it be wonderful to have a line of jewelry commemorating that moment so that President Trump can actually sell the gold at a premium and have a tremendous appreciation of value that we can apply towards Bitcoin? Okay, so it was in the news very recently that there might be $425 billion in Fort Knox worth of gold. There might not be. Doge has to audit it. So what would it mean to actually audit the gold at Fort Knox? I heard one senator say that 50 years ago, he walked in there and looked at it and decided that it was there, which I find very dubious because, okay, so in order to audit gold, you have to do an assay, do a sonogram to make sure that the purity is what is stamped on it. It is a very expensive, time-intensive chemical process, and on top of that, even if you were able to fully verify all of the gold at Fort Knox at tremendous expense, you still don't know what percentage of the total supply is that. How do you go about seeing how much gold is throughout the world? Earlier today, Vivek pointed out that you find a gold asteroid, and now the total supply gets multiplied by 10. So let's contrast that with Bitcoin. With Bitcoin, so the Bitcoin miners deserve a lot of credit, of course. They are proposing blocks. That is also part of their process when they propose a block is that it has to be verified by nodes. There's a check and balance there. And we don't talk about the Bitcoin nodes enough. The Bitcoin nodes are verifying the protocol rules for Bitcoin, and as part of that, they're verifying the Bitcoin supply. And so when you run a Bitcoin node, you can run that on any kind of device, a home computer, and you can see that the Bitcoin that you are receiving is real Bitcoin. It's 100% pure. And so you have a really easy way to audit the total supply. We talked about math today, so 94% of the Bitcoin have been mined. And I generated this chart using my own Bitcoin node. I did not have to go to a central bank's website to see what the monetary policy is. I was able to independently verify that on a peer-to-peer network. No, gold can't do that. On top of that, of course, there's the tremendous cost of storing gold. If you're using a vault, it's rated for maybe 30 minutes against power tools. When you're using a hardware wallet with Bitcoin, it's rated for an infinite amount of time. The latest generation doesn't have any known vulnerabilities. Knock on wood. And you can also do a multi-sig. So you can actually decentralize the custody of Bitcoin in a way that you simply cannot do with gold. So in terms of the utility, of the security of the system, it's far superior. And an interesting example would be you could actually put one of the hardware wallets in a nuclear submarine. You could put another one in a satellite on the dark side of the moon, on Mars. And that you're essentially able to put the custody of Bitcoin to where only a superpower could reach it, a superpower like the United States. And then, of course, sending gold is expensive. Sending Bitcoin is cheap relative to that. And if we look at the other cryptocurrencies, they've got all sorts of problems. And then when we talk about Bitcoin being number one, Ethereum being number two, we're not talking about a photo finish, okay? Bitcoin is very far ahead. And happy to take questions. Find me on Twitter, X, at BitcoinPierre. My DMs are open, and always happy to talk Bitcoin. Thank you.
David, just checking in, making sure I know who the next speaker is. For our next and final speaker today, bringing it home for our closing remarks, please welcome me and join me in welcoming Jack Mahler, CEO of Strike.
All right. Hello, everyone. It's always an honor to be in our nation's capital, and especially to talk about Bitcoin. Oh, how far we've come. So the title of my talk today is Strategic Bitcoin Reserve, the American Monetary Revolution. I'd like to propose a line of thinking that the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve Executive Order and the Bitcoin Act proposed by Senator Lummis is the most significant economic shift and announcement, and the only positive economic announcement that's come out of the United States and this nation's capital in the last 100 years. I think it's a narrative and an idea that is not talked about enough, both in the media and in our nation's capital. So the premise of my talk is that over the last century, American economic policy has been working against the very principles that this country was founded on, specifically life, liberty, and property. And I truly believe that the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve is a turning point in American history, and it's the first positive and hopeful economic announcement that acts in line with the principles that this country was founded on. So specifically, what do I mean when I think of massive economic announcements that have come from the United States of America? I think of 1933 and the Executive Order 6102 and a violation of what I consider to be property rights in this country. I think of 1971 and the Nixon shock, what I think to be as a divorce from hard money and reality in this country. I think of the bailout in 2008 and what I think to be a violation of all men are created equal. And I view the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve as a pivotal moment when contrasted to the last century of economic policy to come out of our nation's capital as something that's revolutionizing and bringing back American principles and the founding ideals of this nation. So we'll go through quick history. 1933, for those that don't know, Executive Order 6102 was a reaction to economic crisis where the U.S. government demanded that citizens turn in their gold, therefore their property, right? Reminds me of this quote from John Adams. Again, I want us as a country to think about what grounded and founded this nation, this great nation. The moment the idea is admitted into society that property is not as sacred as the laws of God, and that there is not a force of law and public justice to protect it, anarchy and tyranny commence. And if you look at the Fifth Amendment, Executive Order 6102 was in direct violation of the amendment that our founding fathers wrote. The founding fathers enshrined protections of private property into the Constitution. And the confiscation of gold from the public was a direct violation of our amendment rights. If you then go to 1971 and the Nixon shock, for those that don't know, I love this New York Times headline. Nixon does stuff about wages, something about taxes. Oh, by the way, he's severing the link between dollar and gold. And it reminds me of this quote from Thomas Jefferson. Again, those that built this very country we're standing in its capital today. Paper is poverty. It is only the ghost of money, not money itself. And when I think of what the Nixon shock did in 1971, is it violated the U.S. Constitution, specifically Article 1, Section 10. No state shall make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payments of debt. And so economic policy in this country over the last century has been a violation of not only the best interest of the public and the best interest of the people and the best interest of its citizens, but the founding ideals that started this great nation. And we go to 2008, what I dubbed the bailout, where global economic crisis destroyed not only this nation, but those all over the world. Reminds me of this quote. I sincerely believe that banking establishments are more dangerous than standing armies. What did 2008 violate? The Declaration of Independence. It was a direct violation to the idea that all men are created equal. In 2008, the economic policies and the reaction to the crisis violated this idea in all of our faces as individual citizens of this country. All men were not created equal that day. And so it's my opinion that for the last century, America has drifted away from its founding principles and sacrificed private property in 1933, sound money in 1971, and free markets in 2008 for short-term policy gain and control, and it was very reactionary and defensive to crisis. And I give all of this to give relative context into what we're living through right now in the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve. I think that this was a pivotal moment in American history and will be looked back as a turning point in economic policy for this country. Because I view a Bitcoin Strategic Reserve as restoring private property rights. The US government is validating and empowering its citizens to own a form of property that we can all self-custody, and they're telling you they will not confiscate and they cannot confiscate. It's restoring sound money principles and enabling and promoting a monetary policy that they themselves cannot control. And it is restoring fair and free markets, and that Bitcoin is a global commodity like money that acts and operates as a truly free market, one of the only ones we have left in the world today. I believe that for the first time in a century, the United States of America has made an economic decision that benefits the public. The public in 1933 was not thrilled with the announcement that you have to give them your property or you're going to jail. The public and the people were not thrilled in 1971 when they realized that it was baked into law that the government can debase and inflate your life. The people were not thrilled in 2008 when they realized all men weren't created equal. The people today are thrilled. The individuals today that have had access to this asset class, access to this monetary policy, access to this property that they can self-custody themselves are thrilled that the United States is making an economic decision that benefits their best interest and secures the future of this country. Think about that. For the first time in a century, you have an economic announcement that comes out of the United States of America that's empowering, that's offensive, that's pro-technology, that's pro-growth. So for the first time in a century, the United States of America is economically aligning with the founding principles of private property, sound money, and free markets. And I'd like to introduce the idea that this is more than an economic decision. Don't get me wrong, it's an economic decision, and Michael Saylor is going to come up and give us all the numbers, and we're going to pay off our debt, and I believe that. But I truly believe that this is a return to American values. And giving this context and referencing it through all of the other economic announcements and new policy over the last century really shows light to this idea. And this administration is focused, this is pro-energy, pro-growth, pro-freedom, pro-industry, pro-inclusion, pro-innovation, pro-technology. The story of humanity is engineering a better world. That's America. That's Bitcoin. I think when it comes to our national security, as nations explore alternatives to the dollar, Bitcoin ensures that we are not only focused on securing strong, hard, sound capital, but also the technology that backs it. When you think about the US financial leadership into the 21st century, we're very pro-AI. We have all the Mag 7, the big tech. I think it's very important that America leads this, and we're not on our heels and we're offensive again. We're not reactionary, we're not defensive, we're not acting against the best interest of the public, we're doing the opposite and preserving U.S. monetary independence. And so, to wrap it, a Benjamin Franklin quote, when the people find that they can vote themselves money, that will herald the end of the republic. And I think this is true in what we've seen with Elon Musk and Doge and all the audits he's been doing and all the fraud that he's been uncovering. And I think this is true today, especially given light and context of the strategic Bitcoin reserve. So I firmly believe that we have a choice as a country. We can continue the cycle of economic decay, or we can embrace the first real solution in a century. And we're not going to confiscate our citizens' property. We're not going to debase and harm their purchasing power. We're not going to treat men differently in this country. We're going to get back to the founding ideas of this great nation and reinstill a lot of the principles that started us and got us to be here in the first place. And I think that the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve, from an economic sense, does that and more. And I think it's the most positive economic policy. And Senator Lummis, I'm so grateful for her Bitcoin Act. And we're going to make America great again through Bitcoin. And I think the context relative to all the other prior announcements over the last century really justifies that idea. So thank you, guys.
Okay, let's see if this thing works. I'm going to close you all out here. We're right around time, so we did it. We weren't sure if we were going to be able to do it, but we did it. Before I close out, we've got a special announcement from Senator Lummis. You know, she spoke earlier today about reintroducing the Bitcoin Act, and I want to make sure that the senator is able to come up here and announce some more details about that act. So everybody give it up for Senator Lummis.
Well, thank you. It's been a joy to be with you today. Michael Saylor, that may be one of the dozen best presentations I've ever heard in my life. Honestly, what a... And to all of you, you are the future. And this is so exciting, and I wish everybody could catch the same fever for the future of America and what Bitcoin brings to it that we all have. I'd like to announce that we will be reintroducing the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve today, the Bitcoin Act in the Senate. So far, co-sponsors, original co-sponsors are Tuberville, Blackburn, Marshall, Sullivan, Marino, and Justice. We have a couple more feelers out for original co-sponsors today. But the House as well, through Nick Begich, has 6 original co-sponsors. The momentum is in our hands, and we need to make this happen. Thankfully, President Trump is with us, and the opportunities are boundless. Thank you for being at this conference. Thank you for making it so very special. And I will turn it back to the Bitcoin Policy Institute. Thank you very much.
On that note, I think it's important to take this as a quick reminder of ultimately how far we've come. A year ago, Strategic Bitcoin Reserve was just an idea, and a year later, we have nearly 10% of the United States Senate that is co-sponsoring this bill from day one of the reintroduction. So that is worth more than the multiple rounds of applause that the senators received today. And thank you to all the other senators who are pioneering this idea and moving it forward. The final thing that I want to mention here is I think today has truly been an incredible day. Every single one of you were handpicked to attend this event, and that's not just me, stroking your ego. We had thousands of people who wanted to be here today, and if you were chosen, there's a reason. So I want to thank you all for being here, for taking the time, and for being additive to what I think was truly an amazing event. That said, conversations like today can't just happen in conference halls. We also want to make sure that they're happening every day in the halls of Congress. Bitcoin Policy Institute, we are the largest cryptocurrency think tank in Washington, D.C. We're the only Bitcoin-focused policy organization in Washington, D.C. And frankly, we've staffed up our team. We have an amazing team, and it's still not enough. There needs to be more Bitcoiners in Washington, D.C. having these conversations on Capitol Hill. And that's why I'm thrilled to announce the Bitcoin Policy Institute is launching our Congressional Fellowship Program. This is our boldest initiative yet. We want to place a Bitcoin expert in every congressional office in Washington, D.C. This fellowship is going to allow BPI to fund and place deeply knowledgeable Bitcoin professionals directly inside Capitol Hill, ensuring that every member of Congress has access to the facts, expertise, and perspective that they need to craft smart Bitcoin policy. If you're passionate about Bitcoin, if you believe in financial sovereignty, if you believe in our mission and open networks, we want you to be a part of this movement. Now, thank you all for being here, for the work that you do, that you have done, and that you will continue to do. Thank you for helping us build the future of Bitcoin. Now, we will see you all at our Bitcoin Policy Summit in Washington, D.C. in June. Have a great day, everybody.